Welcome to the Middle Ages, a time when science was basically guesswork, medicine was mildly threatening, and love was a full-blown medical emergency. Forget candlelit dinners and flowers. The medieval romantic toolkit involved a suspicious mix of herbs, charms, and bodily fluids. The line between pharmacist and witch was thinner than the veil between heaven and purgatory, and everyone was tripping over it. In this era, love wasn't just a feeling, it was an affliction. Physicians described it in the same way they described fevers, infections, and demon possession. If your heart fluttered and your appetite vanished, congratulations, you were lovesick and also possibly cursed. People genuinely believed you could catch love like the plague, and to be fair, both involved a lot of sweating, bad decisions, and eventual regret. Hello travellers! Histories do not always need to be boring. You can rest here and listen to hilarious histories to drift off to sleep. Before we continue, leave a comment to let me know when and where you are listening to this, and hit the subscribe button, but only if you enjoy what I do here. Let's begin. Romantic desire was thought to be dangerous, not just to the soul but to the body. Medieval scholars claimed that longing could cause literal organ damage. Too much unfulfilled desire, they said, could dry out the brain or cause the heart to shrivel like a raisin in the sun of lust. This was not metaphor, this was diagnosis. One 12th century doctor even wrote that lovesick patients should be bled from the arm to drain the excessive heat of passion, because nothing says healing like mild exsanguination. The medieval world was a chemical mess of fear and fascination when it came to love. On one hand, church doctrine taught that desire led straight to eternal damnation. On the other, troubadours serenaded noble women like emotional mercenaries for hire. So you had monks warning against lust while knights were composing sonnets about how much they wanted to die of it. It was confusing times. If you weren't sure whether to pray or flirt, the answer was usually both. Into this chaos came the love potion, the medieval equivalent of a shortcut. Why woo someone with words when you could just brew them? If romance was a disease, potions were the cure, or, depending on who you asked, the cause. These brews promised everything: devotion, desire, obedience, but they also had side effects ranging from mild hallucinations to death by mandrake. Still, who could resist the promise of bottled affection? Love potions were popular across classes. Peasants wanted faithful lovers. Nobles wanted compliant mistresses. Everyone wanted control over a force that, quite frankly, terrified them. Because medieval people didn't see love as a gentle emotional connection. They saw it as cosmic chaos. It came from God, the devil, or astrology, and sometimes all three on a bad day. Falling in love wasn't romantic, it was spiritual Russian roulette. The ingredients used were ambitious. Early concoctions included everything from rose petals and honey to snake hearts and powdered bones. The goal wasn't flavour, it was function. These potions weren't designed to taste good, they were designed to work, and the results were unpredictable at best. One chronicler described a knight who drank a love potion and burned with such passion that he threw himself into a river. Medieval romance, 0, gravity 1. Behind every vial of love potion was a world that understood almost nothing about biology, but absolutely everything about desperation. People wanted guarantees in marriage, in lust, in power. They didn't have science, but they had superstition, and superstition was far more entertaining. Some carried amulets containing dried hearts, while others whispered incantations over cups of wine. Even letters and locks of hair could be turned into magical binding charms. Imagine Etsy, but with more risk of execution. Meanwhile, the church, predictably, was losing its collective mind over all this. Love potions blurred the line between sin and sorcery, a theological nightmare. If you drank one, were you guilty of lust or merely bewitched? Theologians debated, but the answer usually depended on your social rank. Nobles could repent, peasants could burn. But for the ordinary medieval romantic, these risks barely registered. Life was short, hygiene was optional, and genuine companionship was harder to find than fresh bread. A potion offered hope, and hope, in a time of famine, plague and war, was worth the risk of mild poisoning. Whether it was a nobleman seeking an affair, a lonely widow trying to attract a new husband, or a lovesick apprentice pining for his master's daughter, the temptation to manufacture affection was irresistible. Of course, for every successful romance, there were failures, spectacular ones. Some potions worked a little too well, driving victims to obsession or madness. Others did nothing except give everyone involved a stomachache. But the legend persisted, because even if magic couldn't make someone love you, the idea that it might was powerful enough to keep the cauldrons bubbling. By the end of the Middle Ages, love potions had seeped into every layer of life, from monasteries that condemned them to poets who romanticized them. They became the embodiment of medieval contradictions, sacred and profane, hopeful and horrifying, tender and toxic. In short, the medieval world didn't just fall in love, it brewed it, bottled it, and occasionally died from it. The age of love and lunacy was a time when passion met paranoia, when science met sorcery, and when romance came with a recipe and a warning label. The good news, you're in love. The bad news, you might also be hallucinating from henbane. Before medieval Europe went wild for love potions, the formula for romance had already been bubbling for centuries. The Middle Ages didn't invent the idea of magically manipulating affection. They just inherited it from people who really should have known better. The Greeks and Romans were the true pioneers of pharmacological flirtation, and they left behind a legacy of recipes, rituals and ingredients that would make any modern chemist faint. The ancient world was obsessed with love almost as much as it was with empire building. For the Greeks, passion was divine madness, a force sent by Aphrodite herself, half blessing, half curse. The Romans, ever practical, turned it into a thriving business. They believed you could brew desire as easily as wine, and they had the apothecaries to prove it. Aphrodite's temples doubled as early pharmacies where hopeful romantics came not to pray, but to purchase. Forget burning incense. They were burning with curiosity about whether powdered oyster shells could make someone finally look their way. When the Roman Empire fell, its scrolls, recipes, and love sciences didn't die, they just went underground. Europe may have traded marble temples for monasteries, but the lust for knowledge, and occasionally just plain lust, survived. And so the old Greco-Roman manuals on charms and potions slowly reappeared in the hands of people who really shouldn't have had access to them, monks and scholars. Picture it, a medieval monastery candlelit and pious. Somewhere between copying the Psalms and debating sin, Brother Anselm is quietly translating a Greek text titled On the Nature of Erotic Substances. He justifies it, of course, as academic research. The Church may have frowned upon pagan magic, but it was strangely lenient toward classical studies. If Aristotle said that eating rooster hearts increases virility, it somehow sounded more respectable in Latin. Thus, the monasteries became accidental distributors of ancient aphrodisiac wisdom. Scrolls on herbs and humours passed from one monastic library to another, often disguised under misleading titles like On Healing Afflictions of the Soul or Botanical Curiosities of Alexandria. Scholars, doctors, and yes, a few opportunistic smugglers carried this knowledge across medieval trade routes, from the dusty libraries of Byzantium to the bustling ports of Venice. The ingredients that once flavoured Roman love stories were now being traded alongside silk, spices, and occasionally stolen relics. Among these re-imported recipes was an entire pharmacopoeia of romance. Saffron to inflame desire, rocket seed to stir the spirits, and mandrake, always mandrake, to summon passion from the depths of the body and the bowels of hell. There were also less romantic ingredients, powdered lizard tails, goat bile, and something called hippomanes, a supposed substance found on the forehead of a newborn foal, believed to inspire uncontrollable lust. Imagine trying to explain that one to your neighbourhood potion dealer. But the secret ingredient behind all this wasn't a plant, it was translation. When medieval scholars began decoding Greek and Arabic texts, they weren't just reviving medicine. They were resurrecting millennia of sensual superstition. Arab alchemists, who had inherited Greek theory and added their own flair, described how planetary alignments affected emotional chemistry. Venus wasn't just a goddess anymore. She was a cosmic chemical influence. So naturally, if your potion was brewed on a Friday under the right moon, it was guaranteed to make someone notice you, or at least not fall asleep during dinner. This Greco-Arabic alchemy gave European potion makers something precious: legitimacy. Instead of being seen as witches or frauds, they could now pose as natural philosophers, citing Aristotle while grinding up suspicious roots in the back room. Because nothing said scientific credibility like quoting Plato while boiling a frog. Meanwhile, in cities like Paris and Bologna, early universities were rediscovering ancient theories about the heat of the blood. Love, according to Galen and his medieval fan club, was literally a matter of temperature. Too much coldness and myopia led to apathy. Too much heat led to desire. Thus, a truly learned apothecary knew exactly which herbs to prescribe to balance one's passions, by which they meant intensify them beyond reason. If you couldn't find love, the problem wasn't personality, it was thermodynamics. Of course, not everyone was thrilled about this academic rebirth of lust. Church leaders grew increasingly alarmed at the number of scholarly men who suddenly became experts on stimulating the senses. There's only so many times a monk can reference Aphrodite's properties before eyebrows start to rise. One bishop in the 13th century even accused the universities of paganism disguised as medicine. He wasn't wrong. The line between aphrodisiac and enchantment was about as blurry as medieval eyesight. Yet the trade in ancient love remedies continued, often under the radar. Wealthy nobles sent their servants to discreetly acquire exotic powders for vitality. Apothecaries sold special concoctions to travelling merchants for marital success. It became a booming business of plausible deniability. Everyone claimed it was medicine, but everyone knew it wasn't. What's fascinating is how seriously this all was taken. These weren't fools mixing mud for fun. They were working within the best scientific framework they had. If attraction could be caused by planetary influence, bodily humours, or divine favour, why not try adjusting those variables? They were, in their own earnest way, the first chemists of emotion. By the dawn of the 13th century, these ancient recipes had fully merged into medieval life. The language of Aphrodite and Venus transformed into that of herbs and elements, but the goal was the same: control love, or at least give it a nudge. And while the Greeks had once sought beauty and balance, the medieval mind added a new ingredient: desperation. Thus, the Greco-Roman legacy lived on not through philosophers or poets, but through the people grinding herbs in dim candlelight, whispering in Latin, and hoping their clients wouldn't drop dead before they fell in love. The Middle Ages didn't rediscover Aphrodite, they rebranded her. They turned her from goddess to formula, her temple into a marketplace, and her altar into a workbench. Love became a mixture, divine in theory, disastrous in practice. The good news? Ancient wisdom gave medieval romantics their recipes. The bad news? They still didn't come with dosage instructions. Welcome to the medieval laboratory of love. A smoky, candlelit workshop where desire was measured not in chemistry but in temperaments, astrology and unearned confidence. Medieval thinkers may not have known what hormones were, but they certainly acted like they'd discovered them. Attraction in their minds wasn't emotional, and it was elemental, literally. At the heart of it all was humoral theory, the ancient Greek medical model that absolutely refused to die. Everything about your health, mood, and yes, your love life depended on the balance of 4 bodily fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. If that sounds unromantic, you're right, but to medieval people, it was cutting-edge biology. Your body was basically a soup, and if it curdled, your relationships did too. According to this science, every person had a dominant humour that dictated their temperament, and therefore their romantic compatibility. The sanguine were warm, social and amorous, basically the medieval equivalent of someone who flirts with the bartender. Choleric types were fiery and impulsive, good for passionate affairs, but terrible for commitment. Phlegmatic individuals were calm and loyal, ideal for marriage, but not great for excitement. And melancholics, poor melancholics, were moody poets doomed to pine in candlelight forever. So how did medieval doctors fix your romantic imbalance? Simple, by draining or feeding your fluids. If you were too cold and dry, they might recommend hot wine spiced with cinnamon and a nice bloodletting. If you were too hot and moist, steady there, you'd be told to avoid meat and bathe in rosewater. Balance, after all, was everything. One 14th century physician even prescribed moderate music, sweet odours and cheerful company to increase amorous vitality, which sounds less like medicine and more like the world's slowest foreplay. But the humours were only the beginning, because if you wanted to take love seriously, you had to consult the stars. Astrology wasn't just a superstition, it was a social necessity. Your zodiac sign wasn't about personality quizzes, it was about destiny. Medieval astrologers believed that the alignment of planets shaped every romantic encounter. Venus ruled love, Mars governed desire, and Saturn made sure someone in the relationship was always miserable. Marriage contracts were often signed under auspicious skies, and nobles would delay weddings if Mars was in a foul mood. A bad planetary alignment could doom an entire courtship before the first glance. Even physicians got involved. They'd cast horoscopes to determine when it was safest to perform romantic remedies. If Venus was in the right house, congratulations, your potion might work. If not, well, better luck in your next life. The blend of astrology and medicine created a sort of cosmic matchmaking service. You didn't just love someone, your liver and their moon sign had to get along. A fiery choleric Aries was told to seek out a cool watery Cancer for balance. Opposites didn't just attract, they medically corrected each other. The medieval cosmos was basically one big dating chart. And then came alchemy, the ultimate bridge between mysticism and ambition. If humours explained love's mechanics, alchemy promised to control it. Alchemists believed that the same principles that could turn lead into gold could also transmute desire into devotion. To them, love was a form of spiritual alchemy, the merging of two essences into one perfect union. Romantic? Absolutely. Scientific? Not remotely. They used symbols like sulfur representing passion and mercury representing emotion to describe the ideal relationship, fiery yet fluid, dangerous yet divine. Some even believed you could literally distill attraction by mixing bodily fluids, a concept that led to some rather ill-advised experiments. The goal wasn't just to make someone fall in love, it was to create harmony of souls through chemistry. Unfortunately, their chemistry sets were mostly smoke, lead, and wishful thinking. This was a time when emotion was anatomy, and the human heart wasn't just a metaphor. It was an organ with opinions. Medieval physicians wrote entire treatises about how love physically affected the body. The pulse quickened, the skin flushed, the eyes widened, all signs of heat in the blood. Of course, modern science calls this adrenaline. Medieval science called it destiny. Even literature got in on the pseudoscientific act. Courtly poets described love as a humoral imbalance of the soul. Lovers weren't struck by Cupid's arrow. They were infected by vapours rising from the heart and clouding the mind, basically medieval brain fog. And when passion got out of hand, the cure wasn't therapy, it was ayat. The same doctor who might treat a fever with herbs would treat heartbreak with vegetables. Nothing said get over him, like a bowl of lentils. It's easy to laugh at all this now, and we should frequently, but in its own bizarre way, this was the foundation of early psychological theory. Medieval doctors genuinely believed emotions were physical forces that could be measured, treated, and manipulated. It was their version of neuroscience, only with more bloodletting and fewer microscopes. Still, it made for spectacularly bad dating advice. If your crush ignored you, it wasn't because they weren't interested, it was because your bile balance was off. If you were lovesick, you didn't write poetry, you scheduled a leeching. And if all else failed, you could always blame Saturn. In the end, the science of seduction in the Middle Ages wasn't about reason at all. It was a grand performance, part philosophy, part magic, part improv. Scholars debated it, doctors prescribed it, and poets romanticised it. They may not have understood chemistry, but they understood something just as dangerous: the human need to explain why we love, even when it makes no sense. Because in a world without hormones, everything was alchemy. And in a world without logic, love was the most powerful experiment of all. Before chemistry, there was chaos, and in the Middle Ages, that chaos came in leafy, rooty, occasionally poisonous form. The average medieval love potion wasn't brewed from romantic moonlight or divine whispers. It was crafted from whatever your local hedgerow hadn't yet killed. In an era when doctors couldn't explain digestion, apothecaries were out here claiming they could bottle desire. The results? Fragrant disasters that promised passion but usually delivered paralysis. Let's start with the undisputed king of medieval romance, the mandrake root. This unholy vegetable was the celebrity of the potion world, famous, temperamental, and frequently fatal. Shaped vaguely like a human body, it was said to scream when pulled from the earth, killing anyone who heard it. That didn't stop people from harvesting it. It just made them get creative. The proper technique involved tying a hungry dog to the root and running for cover while it yanked it out. Somehow this counted as science. Once safely in hand, the mandrake was believed to contain powerful aphrodisiac and fertility properties, perfect for love spells or lawsuits if you survived the process. Then there was henbane, a plant that truly delivered on its name. Used in small doses, it supposedly inspired love and courage. In slightly larger ones, it inspired vivid hallucinations and an urgent need for last rites. But that didn't stop potion makers. Many believed that a drop of henbane juice could make someone a soft of heart and eager of spirit. They were half right. It could disassemble. It could certainly make you see someone glowing. Parsley might sound innocent, but in the medieval imagination, even your kitchen herbs had romantic ambitions. It was thought to warm the blood and excite affection, and because it grew slowly, it symbolised patience and enduring love. Apothecaries sold parsley-infused tonics to shy lovers who needed a confidence boost. Unfortunately, parsley was also used to induce miscarriages, which made it a questionable ingredient for a potion meant to inspire family values. And then there were the toad bones. Yes, really. In one of history's least appetising trends, it was believed that carrying a dried toad bone could attract love or protect it. Some recipes even required boiling a live toad until the flesh fell off the bones, then selecting the magnetised one that floated against the current of a river. That bone was supposedly infused with the creature's vitality, or at least its lingering resentment. Medieval logic was clear. If it was gross, it was probably powerful. These ingredients weren't just picked at random. Each had symbolic meaning rooted in the natural philosophy of the time. The mandrake, shaped like a person, represented human passion. The toad, an animal of the earth and water, symbolised fertility and desire. Henbane's heat mirrored bodily lust. Parsley's green vibrancy echoed vitality. The Middle Ages loved correspondences, the belief that nature mirrored the human condition, so love magic was essentially a garden-themed personality test. Potion makers worked with an air of solemn mystery, as though handling nuclear materials rather than salad ingredients. Recipes were written in coded Latin, passed down through apprenticeships, and often guarded like family secrets. A typical instruction might read, "Take of the root that cries, mix with the herb of Venus, stir by the light of the waxing moon, and speak the name of the beloved thrice." Translation: we don't know what we're doing, but it looks important. Apothecaries often supplemented herbs with bizarre addition for strength. Drops of human blood, bits of hair, or even nail clippings might be stirred in, not for flavour, but for sympathetic magic. The idea was that by combining something personal with something potent, you could bind another person's will. It wasn't love, it was metaphysical blackmail with nice packaging. The smell, of course, was another matter. Between the mandrake's pungent roots, henbane's bitter fumes, and the occasional toad broth, a medieval love potion probably reeked like a swamp having an identity crisis. Yet customers didn't mind, because if your potion didn't make your eyes water, could it really make your heart flutter? As one 15th century herbalist wrote, "True passion is born of suffering, and so are most of my brews." Still, there was genuine herbal knowledge buried in the nonsense. Medieval healers understood that certain plants did affect mood, energy, and blood flow. Saffron elevated spirits. Cinnamon increased warmth, and wine, the universal solvent of romance, helped just about everything. What they lacked in scientific accuracy, they made up for in enthusiasm and accidental pharmacology. Some modern studies even confirm mild aphrodisiac effects in herbs they used, proving that sometimes blind superstition accidentally tripped over truth. The real magic, though, was in the ritual. Brewing a love potion wasn't just chemistry, it was theatre. Every step carried symbolism. Stirring clockwise invoked attraction, stirring counterclockwise broke curses. Flowers picked at dawn captured purity, while roots dug at midnight embodied secrecy. Potion making turned yearning into performance, a tangible way to do something about feelings no one could explain. In a world that offered few choices, that small act of control felt powerful, and yet danger lurked behind the romance. Henbane and mandrake could kill as easily as they could charm. The difference between love elixir and lethal poison was often a matter of teaspoons. Stories abound of jealous lovers who drank their own potions, hoping to prove devotion, and promptly met Aphrodite face to face, in the afterlife. Nothing said eternal love like shared hallucinations followed by a swift funeral. Still, demand never waned. The worse the ingredients smelled, the more authentic they seemed. A bad odour was proof of potency. A foul taste meant it must be working. In a way, medieval lovers were the original victims of marketing psychology, willing to drink literal dirt if someone swore it led to devotion. In the end, these herbal brews tell us something timeless. People have always been willing to risk everything for the illusion of love. Whether it came from a mandrake root or a modern perfume bottle, the goal was the same: to feel desired, to feel in control, and to believe, if only for a moment, that chemistry could conquer chance. The good news? Your potion might make someone look at you twice. The bad news? You might glow in the dark afterwards. Step into a medieval marketplace, muddy, noisy, and absolutely bursting with questionable life decisions. Chickens run underfoot, merchants shout about miracle cures, and somewhere between the spice seller and the fishmonger stands a hooded figure whispering about liquid affection. That's your local potion maker, part chemist, part therapist, and part hazard to public health. Into the Middle Ages, love potions weren't brewed in sterile laboratories. They were concocted in back rooms, cellars, and smoky cottages, the kind of places where you might trip over a cauldron or a moral boundary. These artisans of attraction came in many forms: rural wise women, wandering apothecaries, ambitious monks who had read one too many Greek manuscripts, and street peddlers who barely knew the difference between herbs and hay. But they all had one thing in common: confidence. Because in a world without regulation, the only qualification you needed to sell love was a steady hand and a convincing story. The process began like a performance. A true potion maker knew presentation was half the spell. Jars of coloured liquid lined their tables, some green and murky, others golden and glowing, all carefully arranged to suggest mystery and magic. Labels? None. Ingredients? A guarded secret. When customers asked what was in the bottle, the answer was always something reassuringly vague, like essence of Venus or distillation of devotion. Translation: mostly water and panic. Every potion maker had their specialty. Some promised unquenchable desire, others eternal fidelity. There were brews to make your lover return, to make them forget, or to make you irresistible to anyone within a 10-foot radius. Results? Not guaranteed. Some even sold antidotes. In case your spell worked too well, it was the medieval version of a subscription model. Love you could buy, refill, and regret later. And the pricing? Chaotic genius. The wealthy paid in gold, expecting exotic ingredients and whispered discretion. Peasants traded eggs, wool, or bread for simpler charms. For the desperate, there was always a bargain bin of leftover batches. Slightly expired may cause mild possession. No one asked for refunds. They either got results or they got a funeral. Behind the curtain, the brewing process was part craft, part improvisation, and all danger. Ingredients were rarely measured. A pinch of mandrake here, a splash of henbane there, maybe a frog leg for texture. The cauldron was both workshop and roulette wheel. One batch could make someone amorous. The next could make them hallucinate that their cow was flirting with them. Potion making was trial and error, emphasis on error. But oh, the showmanship. Potion makers were born salespeople. They told tales of ancient recipes blessed by Venus herself, of secret ingredients gathered under eclipses, and of noble clients who swore by their products. Many even performed mini-rituals at the point of sale, sprinkling salt in circles, chanting Latin that was probably just garbled pantry instructions, or breathing over the bottle to seal the spell. It was advertising before advertising existed, complete with a personal brand of mystique and mild fire hazards. Medieval cities like London, Paris, and Florence had entire networks of potion peddlers. They travelled between fairs and villages, spreading their trade faster than the church could commit. Some operated openly, others in shadows, relying on coded phrases to avoid suspicion. Remedies for a cold heart or waters of courage were euphemisms everyone understood. Behind closed doors, they sold romance by the vial, a fragile promise that someone, somewhere, might finally love you back. For many customers, it wasn't even about magic. It was about hope. Potion makers filled a gap between medicine and emotion, offering something doctors couldn't: comfort. People came to them with trembling hands and lovesick eyes, not because they believed in alchemy, but because they wanted to believe in something. It was the medieval version of retail therapy. Buy enough bottles, and maybe heartbreak would stop feeling terminal. Of course, not everyone approved. Clergymen railed against potion makers as agents of sin. City officials fined or jailed them for witchcraft and moral corruption. But demand always won. Every time a love potion seller was chased from town, two more popped up with new branding and a limited time offer. Humanity's appetite for shortcuts has always outlasted its ethics. Yet some potion makers were genuinely skilled herbalists. They understood mood-altering plants, body heat and scent. A few may have accidentally invented primitive perfumes or sedatives. Some even catered to married couples seeking to rekindle affection, blending calming herbs with wine for what we might generously call medieval couples therapy in a cup. It's easy to laugh at their ingredients. But their clients weren't fools. They were just trying to solve problems modern people still struggle with, only without access to therapists or Netflix. Then there were the scammers, the real stars of the marketplace. They'd sell plain water with dramatic flair, claiming it was distilled from moonlight and angel tears. They'd make sure their potions fizzed, smoked, or turned colours, usually thanks to acid reactions they didn't understand. The goal wasn't efficacy, it was the spectacle. Love was secondary to entertainment. The good ones knew how to turn heartbreak into business, and their customers were happy to pay for the experience. In the end, potion making was less about chemistry and more about storytelling. Each bottle carried not just liquid, but narrative, a promise that your fate could change with a sip. And if it didn't, well, there was always another market, another crowd, another chance to rebrand. The potion maker's true art was never in the brew. It was in selling dreams that smelled faintly of toad. So if you ever wander a medieval fair and someone offers you a guaranteed elixir of affection, remember, you're buying centuries of human optimism distilled into questionable liquid. The good news? It might make you irresistible. The bad news? Mostly to mosquitoes. If there's one thing medieval Europe excelled at, it was hypocrisy dressed in holy robes. Nothing captures that better than the saga of forbidden alchemy, the love potion industry's most paradoxical chapter. Officially, the church declared love magic a gateway to hell. Unofficially, its sermons did little to stop half the nobility from ordering aphrodisiac tonics in bulk. It was the medieval equivalent of loudly condemning sin in public while discreetly subscribing to it via courier. Love potions, to church authorities, represented everything that could go wrong when humans played God. They weren't just dangerous brews, they were seen as acts of rebellion against divine will. After all, God had decided who should love whom, and along came a village witch with a bubbling cauldron saying, "Actually, I can do it faster." That did not sit well with the clergy. In their view, trying to manufacture affection was a direct assault on free will, and, by extension, an affront to heaven's bureaucracy. Church councils debated the issue with apocalyptic seriousness. Was a love potion merely sinful, or was it straight up satanic? The consensus? Definitely satanic. Love magic, they proclaimed, drew its power from demons, not herbs. It wasn't mandrake that stirred desire, it was Mephistopheles. Every potion brewed without divine blessing was, by definition, brewed with infernal help. So if you ever found yourself hopelessly in love after drinking something suspicious, congratulations, you were technically possessed. Naturally, this didn't stop people from drinking them. In fact, the more the church forbade them, the more desirable they became. Human nature, it turns out, is allergic to restraint. The forbidden fruit effect worked perfectly, or rather, the forbidden root. Clerics thundered from pulpits about how such potions enslaved the soul. But in the royal courts, whispered rumours told a different story. Queens seeking influence, courtiers seeking favour, and dukes hoping to rekindle dead marriages all quietly kept their local potion supplier on retainer. In the court of France, one chronicler recorded that noble ladies did keep in their chambers certain flasks of comforting waters, whose effects were known only to God. Translation: everyone knew, and God was pretending not to. These concoctions were ordered discreetly, under the guise of remedies for fatigue, or elixirs of courage. Apothecaries learned to rebrand their stock to survive inquisitive clergy. Love potions became herbal restoratives, and binding charms became protective salves. The labelling was practically medieval marketing spin. The church, for its part, tried to maintain control through fear. Priests preached that those who used love magic would suffer torment in both body and soul. According to some sermons, demons disguised as lovers would appear to those who used potions, a terrifying idea that still didn't deter customers. Because let's face it, when your crush ignores you, a minor risk of demonic haunting feels like a small price to pay. Behind the holy outrage, however, was a very practical problem. The church wasn't just worried about sin, it was worried about social order. Love potions had the potential to disrupt hierarchies. A servant who used one on her master, a merchant's daughter who ensnared a noble, or a mistress who regained a straying husband. These stories weren't just scandalous, they were destabilizing. Love magic allowed the powerless to imagine influence, and that terrified the powerful far more than the devil ever could. In response, ecclesiastical courts began prosecuting love potion cases under the banner of witchcraft. A woman caught selling charms could be accused of demonic pacts, while her customers were quietly ignored, especially if they had titles or money. And there's a reason witch trials rarely included noble women, even though they were some of the most enthusiastic clients. Moral condemnation, it seemed, worked on a sliding scale of wealth. Still, the church's obsession with denouncing love magic only made it more sophisticated. The same monks who publicly burned heretical texts in daylight often studied them by candlelight in secret. Manuscripts on alchemy and medicine often included curious addendums on the improvement of humours and affections. They called it natural philosophy, an intellectual way of saying we're not casting spells, we're just experimenting. Meanwhile, the line between alchemy and love magic blurred further. Alchemists were already trying to transform the matter, so why not emotion? They theorized that attraction was simply a harmony of essences. Mix the right metals, infuse the right oils, and perhaps you could refine the soul itself. The church, horrified, saw this as pride of the highest order. Man trying to replicate divine creation. The alchemist, on the other hand, probably just wanted a date. And yet, alchemists found patrons among the very nobles who attended Mass every Sunday. Kings and queens secretly commissioned experiments for elixirs of harmony, believing they could stabilize marriages or strengthen alliances through potion-assisted affection. History is full of such ironies. The same rulers who condemned witches for mixing herbs were paying gold to men in laboratories, doing precisely the same thing, just with more Latin and glassware. By the 14th century, the Church had given up trying to fully stamp it out. The Inquisition had bigger problems, heretics, schisms, and the occasional plague, and love potions were too slippery to prosecute. Instead, clerical writers shifted tactics. They spiritualized love itself. Sermons began emphasizing that true love could only come from God, not from earthly brews or fleshly indulgence. It was less an argument and more a rebranding of divine monopoly. Still, hypocrisy thrived. The same bishop who condemned pagan enchantments might bless a noblewoman's healing tonic without asking too many questions. The Church's public stance was firm, its private tolerance was flexible. The relationship between religion and romance, like most medieval relationships, was complicated, dramatic, and occasionally toxic. In short, the Church could exorcise demons, but not desire. Love potions survived every sermon, every inquisition, and every threat of eternal damnation. Because while faith demanded purity, human hearts demanded results, even if they came from a bubbling cauldron. The good news, God was forgiving. The bad news, the Inquisition wasn't. When it came to love in the Middle Ages, men brewed trouble, but women paid the price. The world of love potions, charms, and forbidden chemistry may have been a shared obsession, but when things went wrong, when the potion didn't work, or worked a little too well, there was always one person to blame, the woman who made it. Meet the cunning woman, the village herbalist, healer, midwife, and unofficial therapist rolled into one. She knew the language of plants, the rhythms of the moon, and the ailments of both the body and the heart. For centuries she'd been part of local life, curing fevers, helping births, brewing teas for melancholy, and, on occasion, mixing a discreet remedy for unreturned affection. But as church control deepened and superstition thickened, her trade became a perilous tightrope. She was too useful to get rid of, and too powerful to leave unpunished. Love magic sat at the dangerous crossroads of sin, sexuality, and suspicion, all things medieval society liked to pretend it didn't have. When a potion failed to secure affection, the customer whispered betrayal. When it succeeded and a husband suddenly began doting on his wife, neighbours muttered bewitchment. Either way, someone was getting accused of consorting with the devil. Women, especially those who lived alone or outside the control of a man, were walking targets. A widow who knew how to mix herbs? Suspicious. A young woman who attracted too much attention? Clearly enchanted. A midwife who brewed something for childbirth and it went wrong? Witchcraft. A midwife who succeeded too well? Also witchcraft. Obviously she'd made a deal with infernal forces for her skills. Medieval logic had all the consistency of a drunk peasant's love letter. And love potions were the perfect excuse for hysteria. If a nobleman's affair caused scandal, he could claim enchantment. It wasn't lust, my lord, he'd protest. It was sorcery. If a husband grew bored of his wife, it was her fault for using magic to enslave his will. If he didn't stray, it was proof she had used witchcraft to keep him faithful. There was no winning scenario. As one 15th century preacher ranted, when a man loves too fiercely, there is witchcraft. When he loves too little, there is witchcraft also. The Malleus Maleficarum, that delightful medieval bestseller on how to spot and prosecute witches, devoted an entire section to women who bind the minds of men with potions. It described them as more carnal than men, driven by lust and jealousy, and ever prone to evil arts. In other words, women were dangerous because they understood herbs, emotions, and how to weaponize both. Also because men in power had the emotional maturity of spoiled cheese. For rural communities, however, the cunning woman was indispensable. She was the medieval world's version of a local pharmacist, psychologist, and Google search bar combined. People came to her for cures, blessing, or just someone to talk to, but her remedies existed in a moral grey zone. She walked the line between faith and heresy, healing and hexing. Sometimes she'd whisper a prayer while grinding herbs, sometimes she'd murmur something that sounded suspiciously unbiblical. And that was enough. If a love potion worked too well, leading to scandal or obsession, the consequences could be brutal. Entire towns turned on their healers overnight. A noblewoman's illicit pregnancy, the witch's doing, a husband abandoning his family for a younger woman, the witch again. Even livestock misbehaving could somehow become part of the same accusation chain. My cow will not milk. Surely the woman who sold my daughter that charm has cursed us, because nothing says logic like connecting a romantic spell to dairy production. Behind these accusations, however, simmered fear. Era of female autonomy. Love magic gave women a form of agency in a world that allowed them almost none. They couldn't vote, own much property, or escape bad marriages, but they could brew. A bottle of charm or curse gave them influence. Even the idea of it was power. And power, especially when held by women, made patriarchal society profoundly uncomfortable. So they called it witchcraft, a convenient word for something we don't understand and therefore must destroy. This fear infected even art and the literature. Medieval ballads warned of seductive witches who lured men with enchanted wine. Moral plays depicted women stirring cauldrons while demons whispered instructions. In these stories, female knowledge wasn't wisdom, it was temptation. The message was clear. The moment a woman started mixing herbs, civilization was apparently one potion away from collapse. Of course, it wasn't just rural healers who bore the blame. In courts and cities, noble women were sometimes accused too, though usually with more discretion and fewer flames. A countess caught meddling with amatory charms might face a stern priest and a week of penance, while a peasant doing the same might face a mob. The punishment was inversely proportional to the perfume budget. Even when not executed, accused women were suicidally annihilated. Neighbours shunned them, clients vanished. Their families lived under suspicion for years. Ironically, this only confirmed their guilt. After all, what but guilt could make someone so alone? The medieval world turned isolation into evidence, ensuring that once accused, survival meant living as proof. By the late 15th century, witch hunts intensified, and love magic became one of the most common pretexts for prosecution. In Germany, a healer named Agnes Bernauer was drowned in the Danube for allegedly enchanting a duke. In France, dozens of enchantresses were burned for selling powders of affection. The tragedy was almost formulaic. A man sinned, a woman paid. Yet despite the danger, women continued to brew, heal, and whisper over herbs. They did so quietly, carefully, and with the understanding that survival required secrecy, because for every witch burned, there were 10 more who kept their cauldrons hidden, mixing herbs by candlelight and pretending it was soup. And why did they keep doing it? Because people kept asking. Love is a stubborn business, and desperation never listens to reason. The village healer might risk her life for every potion she sold, but as long as there was heartbreak, there would be buyers. And as long as there were buyers, there would be witches, real or imagined. In the end, the witch hunts weren't about magic. They were about control, about silencing women who knew things, did things, and didn't ask permission first. The good news, love potions occasionally worked, sometimes too well. The bad news, so did torches. In the glittering courts of medieval Europe, love was never just about the heart, it was about strategy. Behind every royal romance was a web of ambition, alliances, and carefully calculated charm. And when words, wit, and good looks failed to sway affection, there was always one final resort: a potion. The nobles didn't just fall in love, they engineered it. While peasants bought love potions to win over thatched roof sweethearts, courtiers bought them for power. In royal circles, attraction could move armies, rewrite treaties and decide inheritances. A single glance from the king could mean wealth, land or influence. So when that glance didn't come naturally, someone usually tried to brew it into existence. The medieval aristocracy might have pretended to disdain superstition, but behind embroidered curtains and gilded doors, they were as superstitious as any village witch, just with better silverware. Love, lust and leverage. Royal courts were emotional laboratories where politics wore perfume. Queens vied for influence, mistresses competed for permanence, and advisors tried to keep the peace while secretly passing bottles under the table. A well-placed love potion could make or break a dynasty. In some cases, it literally did. One of the earliest whispered scandals involved Isolde and Tristan, whose doomed passion supposedly began after they accidentally drank a love potion intended for someone else. Medieval audiences loved the story not because it was tragic, but because it felt plausible. Nobles were surrounded by so much political pressure and so little personal freedom that drinking your emotions into existence sounded downright sensible. By the 13th century, actual nobles had turned the myth into manual. Love potions became the weapons of intimacy, brewed by apothecaries under strict confidentiality. They weren't purchased in alleys, but ordered discreetly through servants or foreign merchants, often disguised as perfumes or tonics for vitality. The fine line between charm and treason was measured in ounces, not morals. In France, noblemen were notorious for their scented sachets and aromatic waters. One Parisian apothecary was arrested in 1320 for supplying a series of Rochelle ladies with philtres to soften their husband's temper. Translation: they wanted him to stop yelling about taxes and start noticing their hair. Meanwhile, at the English court, rumours circulated that certain ladies-in-waiting carried charms sewn into their sleeves, powders to inspire affection, oils to spark jealousy, or, if necessary, drops to ensure forgetfulness. Alchemy in the boudoir. This wasn't just gossip. Nobles genuinely believed love could be distilled. Many had private alchemists, and some of those alchemists specialised in what they called harmonising the humours of affection. It sounded noble, scientific even, but it was just chemistry with romantic delusions. They blended spices, resins and animal essences, sometimes with a dash of gold leaf to symbolise purity. The result? Potions that looked impressive, smelled exotic, and occasionally made people faint. At times, love potions doubled as political insurance. Marriages among the elite were often cold, calculated contracts designed to merge estates, not hearts. A bride might find herself shipped off to a husband twice her age, who spent more time hawking than speaking to her. In those situations, a potion promised not just affection but survival. If a few drops in his wine made him docile or affectionate, all the better. Of course, there were risks. Potions were unpredictable. Too much of a warming herb might lead to delirium. Too little, and the desired spark never came. When things went wrong, the fallout could be catastrophic. A 15th century Italian noblewoman, Beatrice de Tenda, was accused of giving her husband a charm of obedience that made him ill, a convenient excuse for his political enemies to execute her. And that became the true danger. The rumour of a potion was often deadlier than the potion itself. Accusations of enchantment flew through courts faster than gossip about who wore what to the coronation. If a king suddenly favoured one mistress over another, tongues wagged about sorcery. If a queen gained influence, whispers of witchcraft followed. Love magic, real or imagined, was the most convenient political smear campaign ever invented. The royal supply chain. The trade in elite love potions became its own hidden economy. Italian perfumers, Arabic alchemists, and Jewish physicians were all rumoured to craft elite blends. These potions were as much status symbols as they were supposed solutions. Imported luxuries bottled in glass, sealed with wax and labelled in Latin no one could read. Nobles weren't stupid, they wanted exclusivity. A noblewoman wouldn't risk her reputation with something sold to peasants in the marketplace. She wanted a custom elixir made with rare ingredients, rosewater from Damascus, ambergris from the sea, musk from India. A filter of affection wasn't just romantic desperation, it was a luxury brand. The medieval equivalent of saying mine's imported. Some kings even dabbled in the art themselves. Emperor Frederick II of the Holy Roman Empire reportedly experimented with love potions and perfumes, claiming to test their natural philosophy. Historians suspect he was testing something far more entertaining. Across the Channel, English courtiers joked that no man may rise in favour without first rising in scent. Whether the scent came from cologne or chemistry was left unsaid. Love as diplomacy beyond scandal, love magic also played a diplomatic role. Courtly marriages often required more enthusiasm than either party could muster. Ambassadors occasionally carried gifts of goodwill, coded packages containing perfumes, oils, and sometimes elixirs of friendship. It was all part of soft power, medieval style. A sip of cordial here, a whisper of affection there, and suddenly a peace treaty looked more appealing. But the most fascinating part? Most of these noble users probably didn't believe in magic at all, at least not fully. They believed in influence. A potion wasn't proof of superstition. It was a psychological prop. The gesture itself was the magic, the act of drinking something forbidden, mysterious and full of promise. It gave people courage to flirt, confidence to speak, and excuses when caught. Because in court life, plausible deniability was worth more than gold. If love went wrong, you could always claim, it wasn't me, it was the potion. A perfect scapegoat for human desire. Tasteless, odourless, and conveniently unprovable. The aftertaste of power. So while peasants faced flames for mixing herbs, the upper classes were doing it with silver spoons. The only real difference was who got away with it. For the nobles, love potions weren't superstition, they were strategy. Another weapon in the arsenal of charm and control. The good news? Courtly chemistry sometimes worked, at least enough to inspire poems, mistresses and scandals. The bad news? The hangovers were legendary. When medieval lovers said they'd die for love, they often meant it literally. Beneath the rosy language of passion and devotion, the world of love potions harboured a darker secret. One mixed not with rose petals and honey, but with arsenic, mercury, and the kind of ingredients that should have come with a skull and crossbones label. In an age that barely understood digestion, the pursuit of romance often meant flirting with chemical disaster. While the church thundered about souls, potion makers quietly turned kitchens into killing fields. For many, the more dangerous the ingredient, the more potent it was believed to be. If it burned, tingled, or made your vision shimmer around the edges, really that meant it was working. Pain, as one medieval alchemist allegedly wrote, is the fire through which passion is purified. A lovely sentiment, unless you were the one drinking the stuff. Let's start with arsenic, the reigning monarch of medieval toxins. It was the perfect ingredient for those who wanted devotion and plausible deniability. Found in common minerals, easy to disguise in wine or syrup, arsenic became a favourite among both apothecaries and assassins. In love potions, it was used in trace amounts to create flushed skin and rapid heartbeat, physical signs of excitement that could be mistaken for attraction. Unfortunately, dosage was a slippery thing. Too much and your lover went from love-struck to lifeless in about 15 minutes. Physicians called it accidental poisoning. Everyone else called it romantic miscalculation. Then there was mercury, the original bad idea in a bottle. Known for its shiny allure and warming qualities, mercury was often added to mixtures intended to stir the blood or restore vigour. Medieval people, bless them, didn't know that mercury was slowly turning their internal organs into soup. They thought the metallic taste and trembling hands were signs that the potion was activating. By the 14th century, it had become a favourite among desperate nobles trying to rekindle cold marriages. Many drank mercury-laced concoctions in hopes of reigniting affection. They succeeded in reigniting something, mostly inflammation. And of course, no tour of romantic recklessness is complete without nightshade, the femme fatale of the medieval herb world. Known by its more elegant name, Atropa belladonna, meaning beautiful lady, nightshade was adored for its ability to dilate pupils and create an alluring, dreamy expression. Women would drop tiny amounts of the juice into their eyes for that mysterious wide-eyed look. It worked beautifully, right up until blindness set in. Ingested nightshade caused hallucinations, delirium, and occasionally death, but it did make the victim appear flushed and euphoric first, which for some reason was considered an acceptable trade-off. These weren't fringe experiments either. They were mainstream among the fashionable elite. Apothecaries across Europe sold carefully measured, or carelessly guessed, doses of these deadly substances, advertising them as filters boii avada, or elixirs of renewal. There were no warning labels, no controlled substances, and definitely no medieval equivalent of a poison control hotline. If a potion didn't kill you, that counted as success. Adding to the danger was the sheer ignorance of chemistry. Medieval potion makers worked under the assumption that heat equaled power. If a little arsenic made someone blush, a little more would surely make them swoon. If one drop of belladonna brightened the eyes, 3 would probably ensure marriage. And if mercury caused tingling, well, that was clearly passion. No one questioned the logic because everyone was too busy vomiting or seeing angels. Even the supposedly harmless additives could turn lethal in the wrong combinations. For instance, aphrodisiac wines were often mixed with lead-based sweeteners because lead made the flavour smoother. Yes, smoother, right before it made you insane. Lead poisoning was so common among the upper classes that historians now believe much of their romantic melancholy was actually heavy metal poisoning. That noble sigh by the window, probably neurological damage. It wasn't all fatal mistakes, though. Some of it was intentional. Poison and passion shared a bed in medieval politics. The same bottle that could make a heart race could make it stop. Love potions were often indistinguishable from poison brews. And sometimes that was the point. Jealous wives, scheming heirs, and mistresses outstaying their welcome all had reasons to turn chemistry into homicide. In one 15th century French scandal, a duchess was accused of giving her husband a philtre of devotion that left him devoted mainly to the grave. She was executed, of course, for murder, not bad chemistry. But the real danger wasn't just in the ingredients, it was in the trust. These potions were made by people with no formal training, guided only by rumour, instinct, and the occasional Latin footnote. Imagine trying to measure mercury by sight or estimating the right amount of arsenic based on the colour of the steam. It was more art than science, and not the good kind of art. Of course, the thrill of danger was part of the appeal. Drinking a love potion felt like crossing into forbidden territory, an act of passion and defiance. Lovers toasted to their fates with trembling hands, half convinced they'd either find ecstasy or eternity. In that sense, the risk was the romance. The idea that love might be worth dying for made these brews seem poetic, even glamorous, right up until someone started foaming at the mouth. Over time, physicians began to recognise that the problem with these mixtures wasn't demonic influence but human stupidity. By the late 15th century, medical texts started warning that many so-called love filters caused heat of the stomach, confusion of the mind, and destruction of the spirits. In modern terms, nausea, hallucination, and death. But the warnings came too late. The belief in the power of dangerous desire was far more intoxicating than reason. Still, it's hard not to admire the sheer optimism of it all. People drank mercury and called it devotion. They ingested arsenic and called it affection. Love was literally killing them, and they thought it was a sign that it was working. The good news, your potion might make them burn with passion. The bad news, that's just the mercury. Before the age of candlelit dinners and dating profiles, medieval romantics relied on the sky. In their eyes, love wasn't born in the heart. It was scheduled by the heavens. Every kiss, every flutter of the soul, every poorly thought-out potion was supposedly dictated by planetary motion. And if you wanted your love brew to work, you'd better have checked your lunar calendar first. Because in the Middle Ages, no one fell in love by chance. They fell according to the moon in Taurus. Astrology in the medieval world wasn't some quirky hobby. It was the closest thing they had to predictive science. Doctors used it to time surgeries, farmers used it to plant crops, and lovers used it to figure out why their crush didn't reply to their parchment letter. The logic was simple. The universe ran on cosmic order, so surely the same stars that govern tides could also manage your love life. Who needs therapy when Mercury can explain everything wrong with your relationship? For potion makers, astrology wasn't optional, it was essential. Brewing love under the wrong alignment could spell disaster, literally. The most potent elixirs had to be mixed when Venus, the planet of love, was strong, meaning in her own sign, Taurus or Libra, or forming a friendly angle to the moon. If Venus was in debilitation, your potion might backfire, turning adoration into indigestion. Medieval almanacs came with actual warnings like, avoid matters of the heart whilst Mars afflicts Venus. Translation, don't flirt when the universe is in a bad mood. Potion recipes reflected this cosmic micromanagement. A 14th century manuscript on amatory arts instructed that a love brew must be stirred under the waxing moon to encourage affection's growth. Brewing during the waning moon risked diminishment of feeling. Some texts even specified hours of the day, when the first cock crows or ere the sun doth wake the world. It wasn't chemistry, it was celestial scheduling. Of course, this all became hilariously impractical in cloudy medieval Europe, where visibility of the heavens was about as reliable as a politician's vow of chastity. Peasants would squint up at the fog and guess which phase the moon probably was in. Some enterprising potion makers simply faked it. Yes, milady, the moon is absolutely waxing, I can feel it spiritually. The customer rarely questioned the forecast, because let's face it, no one wanted to wait another month to make Geoffrey from the stables notice them. But astrology wasn't limited to the moon. Each planet contributed its own romantic seasoning. Venus governed love and beauty, of course, but Mars handled passion and the occasional argument. The moon ruled fertility and emotion, while Mercury oversaw communication, the medieval equivalent of texting compatibility. Jupiter blessed unions with fortune. Saturn cursed them with misery. The art of potion timing was about balancing these celestial personalities, a kind of galactic matchmaking service. Astrologer alchemists went to astonishing lengths to align their brews with the heavens. They'd consult charts, track transits, and carve zodiac symbols onto potion bottles for extra power. Some even incorporated astrological talismans into the process. Small metal charms engraved with planetary signs dipped briefly into the potion and then wrapped in silk. Because why rely on herbs when you could drag the entire cosmos into your love life? And then there were the rituals involving livestock, because of course there were. Astrology wasn't just for scholars with quills, it had a strong rural following too. Peasant traditions tied the success of a love charm to farm animals, which were seen as cosmic barometers of fate. For example, if a cow mooed during the stirring of your potion, Venus approved. If it refused to moo, better try again next lunar cycle. One English folk charm instructed, stir with a hen's feather when the moon is new, and love shall grow like spring wheat. It didn't specify what to do if the hen objected, but given medieval hygiene standards, probably nothing good. The moon also played a role in romantic predictions. Lovers would gaze at it and whisper names, waiting to see if a shadow crossed the surface, a sign that their beloved was thinking of them. Farmers' daughters buried apples under moonlight to attract suitors. Noble ladies left wine outside to absorb lunar virtue. In essence, the moon was everyone's long-distance relationship counsellor. Astrology gave medieval lovers something science couldn't: structure. In a world full of uncertainty, plague, war, famine, and suspicious cheeses, the sky at least felt predictable. If love failed, it wasn't because your potion maker botched the recipe. It was because Saturn was being a jealous jerk. Cosmic blame offered emotional comfort, And really, who wouldn't rather accuse Mars of interfering than admit their crush just wasn't that into them? Even the church's disapproval couldn't fully stamp it out. Astrology was officially frowned upon but quietly tolerated, especially when it didn't challenge theology too directly. Many monks secretly cast horoscopes, justifying it as astronomy. Some even published guides on how to interpret Venus's influence, purely, of course, for understanding God's creation. And definitely not to help Sister Marguerite decide when to brew a little something for Brother Thomas. By the late Middle Ages, astrology had become a full-fledged science of seduction. Manuals circulated through universities and courts, teaching readers how to read the signs of affection. They included advice like, "Those born under Leo crave admiration. Those under Virgo are slow to love, but faithful when won." Essentially, it was the 15th century version of a zodiac dating app. Did any of it work? Probably not. That wasn't the point. The rituals gave people agency in matters they couldn't control. When hearts were fragile and lives short, the cosmos offered meaning, or at least a distraction. Stirring a potion under the right moonlight made you feel like fate was finally on your side, even if your side was mostly covered in toad bones. The good news, the stars might align for love. The bad news, they also align for food poisoning. While nobles hired apothecaries and astrologers to brew love potions under imported moonlight, the common folk had to make do with what they could find between the firewood and the cabbage patch. There were no marble laboratories here, no Latin labels or gilded vials, just hearth smoke, old bread, and a remarkable ability to mistake desperation for innovation. Welcome to the world of folk magic, where love was cooked, not conjured, and where the line between romance and soup was perilously thin. For peasants and villagers, magic wasn't exotic, it was everyday life. The same hands that churned butter and patched roofs were expected to ward off curses, bless livestock, and occasionally convince the neighbour's son to propose. Love charms were kitchen projects, born from scraps, superstition and gossip. You didn't need a university degree. You needed a spoon, a strong stomach, and the conviction that a little parsley and prayer could turn attraction into destiny. A favourite starting point was food. In an age when hunger was constant, eating was the closest thing to sacred ritual, and what better vessel for magic than a meal? Folk recipes claimed you could make someone fall in love by secretly slipping a few drops of your sweat into their stew. Others suggested baking a loaf of bread with your initials carved inside the crust. If your beloved ate it without choking, that was fate's blessing. If he did choke, well, fate had spoken in other ways. Beverages were another tool of romance. Ale, wine, or even boiled water could be turned into love draughts by reciting the right rhyme while stirring. One English charm advised, "By bread and by brew, let his heart renew. By moon and by sun, let his heart be one." One. It didn't rhyme well, but neither did most medieval teeth. Sometimes these brews contained herbs like thyme or rosemary, thought to strengthen affection or more likely cover the taste of whatever else had gone in. Then came the bodily ingredients, because medieval people had a very loose relationship with hygiene and boundaries. Folk wisdom declared that the surest way to bind someone's heart was to slip a piece of your own. Metaphorically, of course, but sometimes alarmingly literal. A drop of blood, a strand of hair, or a few nail clippings stirred into a drink were said to form an unbreakable bond. One 15th century love spell from Germany instructed the brewer to mingle thine blood with red wine and whisper his name thrice. Romance, apparently, came with a touch of hemoglobin. And let's not forget the egg, nature's favourite symbol of fertility and confusion. Eggs appeared in countless charms, boiled, buried, painted, or prayed over. In Italy, a woman might write her crush's name on an eggshell and hide it beneath her bed for 9 nights, believing it would hatch a relationship. In England, lovers cracked eggs into water to read their shapes for omens. 2 yolks meant marriage, 1 broken yolk meant heartbreak, and if the egg floated, Someone probably needed to clean the water barrel. For those with no access to herbs or livestock, there was always prayer-based magic. Equal parts religion and rebellion. Villagers whispered verses from the Bible, mixed with pagan incantations older than Christianity itself. One Breton charm began, "By St. Martha and the Mother of God, let his heart burn as this candle burns," usually recited while dripping wax into a bowl of water shaped like a heart. In theory, it summoned affection. In practice, it just summoned smoke and suspicion. The beauty and danger of folk magic was its accessibility. Anyone could do it, which meant anyone could be accused of it. A love charm gone wrong could spiral into scandal. If a young man suddenly became obsessed or ill after drinking something offered by a hopeful admirer, the village would start whispering. She bewitched him, they'd say, because the idea that he just drank 4-day-old ale was apparently less believable. For rural women especially, success in love could look dangerously like sorcery. Still, not all folk magic was dark or manipulative. Many of these charms were surprisingly wholesome, rooted in hope rather than control. Some involve simple symbolic acts, tying 2 ribbons together, exchanging bread at sunrise, or tossing flowers into a running stream. Others were performed communally at festivals or May Day gatherings, where love spells mingled with music and cider, and everyone conveniently forgot to ask whether it worked. Of course, some spells were just plain weird. In parts of Scandinavia, girls were told to place a frog under their pillow to dream of their future husband. In Ireland, one charm involved kissing a piece of salted bacon before hanging it in the chimney overnight. The man who ate it in your dream would be the one. And in Eastern Europe, farmers sometimes whispered a suitor's name into a beehive, believing the bees would carry the message to him. That's right, medieval people basically invented postal service by the insect. Behind the oddness, though, was something deeply human. These weren't fools. They were people trying to bring order to the chaos of emotion. Folk magic gave structure to longing. It made the mysterious mechanical love became a recipe, heartbreak a problem to fix. In a world with little control over fate, a kitchen charm offered the illusion that you could make someone love you back, even if only for one enchanted evening. And perhaps that's why these practices endured. They weren't just about love, they were about hope. In small cottages and smoky taverns, when life was hard and choices few, these homemade spells were acts of belief. If the church had its saints and the nobles their astrologers, the peasants had garlic, moonlight and optimism. So yes, half the ingredients came from the pantry and the other half from wishful thinking. But somehow that was enough. The good news? You might win a heart with nothing but bread and courage. The bad news? You'll never get the smell of boiled parsley out of your kitchen. Long before modern advertising perfected the art of selling people their own insecurities, medieval potion peddlers had already cornered the market on human desperation. They were the travelling salesmen of the soul, merchants who didn't deal in spices or silks, but in longing, loneliness, and mild hallucination. They called themselves healers, philosophers, or masters of attraction. Everyone else called them what they really were, con artists with cauldrons. These were not the dignified alchemists of royal courts or the herbal grannies of the countryside. The merchant of desire was a breed apart, equal parts performer, liar, and self-proclaimed visionary. They roamed from town to town, setting up stalls in marketplaces, fairs, or near the local church, because nothing says repent like impulse buying a love potion. Their stands gleamed with glass vials, coloured liquids, and mysterious powders, each promising to fix something your personality couldn't. Their advertising was irresistible. Painted signs declared, "The heart's delight, guaranteed affection." The kiss of Venus in a bottle. Behind the table stood a charismatic seller in a slightly singed cloak, smiling with the confidence of someone who knew their customer base had no other options. Because medieval love was difficult, messy, and usually arranged by people who'd never met you. If you wanted affection instead of alliance, you had to buy it. And business was good. Heartbreak is a renewable resource. The average potion peddler carried a catalogue of emotional products. There were filters for desire, powders for fidelity, and oils to soften the heart. They sold elixirs for unfaithful lovers, charms against romantic rivals, and, for the truly hopeless, draughts of forgetfulness. Some even offered potions that guaranteed dreams of your beloved, a medieval precursor to both romantic escapism and sleep paralysis. Their ingredients were as questionable as their ethics. Most brews consisted of harmless herbs, wine, honey, or crushed flowers. Some added spices to mimic exotic origins, while others used animal fat or coloured pigments to create drama. But the secret ingredient wasn't in the bottle, it was in the story. A true merchant of desire could sell boiled cabbage water if he claimed it was blessed by Aphrodite's tears, and indeed many did. Each transaction was a performance. A peddler might whisper Latin incantations, wave burning herbs for purification, and dip the bottle in holy water to sanctify its power. Some even brought small animals, doves, cats, frogs, as part of the spectacle. The goal wasn't to sell a potion, it was to sell belief. The more mysterious the ritual, the higher the price. The more you paid, the more it must be working. That's the medieval version of brand psychology. Of course, not every merchant worked alone. Some operated in partnerships, like early marketing teams. One would play the healer, mixing potions with solemn importance, while another posed as a satisfied customer. Ah yes, I drank his potion, and within a week my husband stopped gambling and started complimenting my hair. The crowd, ever hopeful, would buy in droves. It was snake oil salesmanship centuries before snakes got the credit. Travelling merchants had to adapt quickly to local customs. In Italy, they leaned into sensuality and classical references, a kiss from Venus herself. In England, they pitched morality, a holy cordial to bind pure affection. In Germany, they promised efficiency, drink once and marry twice. And in France, they leaned on charm, claiming their brews were tested by ladies of courtly renown, which, while entirely false, was too flattering to question. Their clientele was diverse. Peasants bought cheap potions hoping to secure marriages. Widows sought charms to rekindle affection, or simply attract companionship. Knights purchased elixirs of vigour that promised eternal stamina, and occasionally just resulted in dizziness. Even priests, despite official disapproval, were known to purchase herbal restoratives for study purposes. Everyone, it seemed, had a reason to need a miracle in a bottle. Of course, the results were inconsistent. Most customers experienced nothing more than a mildly flavoured hangover. Some reported genuine euphoria, placebo effects so powerful they mistook optimism for magic. A few, however, suffered less poetic outcomes. Burns from spilled mixtures, rashes from mysterious ointments, or worse, the emotional crash of realising their beloved was still completely uninterested. It was medieval heartbreak with added chemical disappointment. Yet for all their fraudulence, these merchants filled a real social gap. The Middle Ages didn't offer therapy, dating advice, or matchmaking apps. If you were lonely, you either prayed or drank something strange. The Merchant of Desire offered a middle ground, not divine intervention, but at least a customer service line. They listened to your heartbreak, nodded sagely, and handed you a solution in exchange for a coin. It was empathy with a markup. Some were even strangely moral about it. "I sell not deception," one 15th century potion seller allegedly told an inquisitor, "but hope, and hope, my lord, has no antidote." You almost have to admire the gall. Others weren't so lucky. When caught, potion peddlers could face fines, imprisonment, or in extreme cases, accusations of witchcraft. But the trade always rebounded, because heartbreak is as recession-proof as greed. By the later Middle Ages, entire towns had unofficial love markets, fairs where merchants sold charms, perfumes, and aphrodisiac tonics alongside trinkets and pastries. They became social events, especially for the unmarried, who pretended to browse for bargains while secretly eyeing potential buyers of both potions and affection. It was capitalism and courtship all in one convenient chaos. Ultimately, the Merchant of Desire wasn't just a con man, he was a mirror. He reflected humanity's timeless urge to believe that love could be bottled, bought, or at least borrowed. People didn't buy potions because they worked. They bought them because they might. In a world that offered little control over anything, life, death, crops, or kings, that might was intoxicating enough. The good news? You could buy hope for a single coin. The bad news? Refunds were not part of the magic. Few ages in history were as confused about love as the Middle Ages. This was a time when poets sang about courtly devotion while priests warned that kissing could open a portal to hell. Romance, faith, and fear all danced together in a candlelit moral panic. To love too little was to be cold and unfeeling. To love too much was to invite damnation. The result? A society that treated affection like an illness, best admired from a distance and cured by confession. At the heart of the confusion was the great medieval question: when does love become sin? The Church preached that true love, caritas, spiritual and pure, came from God. But the moment your heart fluttered for someone who wasn't wearing a halo, you risked tumbling headfirst into cupiditas, carnal lust, the devil's favourite entertainment. In other words, affection was fine as long as it didn't involve the body, which is a bit like saying food is holy as long as you don't eat it. This moral division didn't just live in sermons, it dominated the culture. Troubadours sang of courtly love, an idealised, unattainable affection between a knight and a noblewoman, usually someone else's wife. It was supposed to be spiritual, admiration from afar, untainted by physical contact. In reality, it was untainted only until the torchlit corridors were empty. The idea was that unfulfilled love elevated the soul. In practice, it mostly elevated gossip. The Church, naturally, tried to impose order on all this emotional chaos. Marriage was declared sacred, passion was declared suspicious, and lust, well, lust was treated like the flu. Everyone had it, no one admitted it, and priests offered questionable cures. Confessionals overflowed with people terrified that a stray glance or an impure thought had doomed them. Manuals for confessors even included categories for sins of the flesh, with dizzying specificity. One 13th century guide listed 29 different ways to misuse your imagination. Medieval guilt wasn't just deep, it was organised. Theologians wrote entire treatises trying to diagnose love. Was it divine inspiration or demonic delusion? Some argue that God placed desire in humans so they would seek spiritual union. Others claim the devil invented it to distract monks. In Paris, scholars at the University of Sorbonne debated whether love potions could ever produce true affection or only counterfeit lust. One theologian concluded, "If a man loves a woman by potion, he loves not her but the sin within her." That's a long-winded way of saying, "Sorry, my love, the devil made me do it." Even medicine joined the argument. Physicians tried to differentiate between love sickness, a legitimate physical condition caused by melancholy vapours, and lustful obsession, a moral disease caused by excess heat. The cure for lovesickness was conversation and light music. The cure for lust was fasting and bloodletting, because nothing cools desire like mild anemia. For ordinary people, though, the distinction was nonsense. Passion didn't care about doctrine. Peasants fell in love at festivals. Merchants courted in taverns. Widows remarried for companionship. And all of them risked moral condemnation if anyone thought their affection was too joyful. Love wasn't private, it was a public matter, scrutinised by priests, neighbours, and occasionally livestock. If you looked too happy, people assumed magic was involved. And that's where things got truly absurd. When someone fell suddenly and intensely in love, it was seen as suspicious. Natural affection, the Church said, grew slowly, like piety or mouldy bread. Rapid infatuation had to be unnatural, and unnatural things were the devil's department. So if you swooned at first sight, congratulations, you'd been bewitched. Many a broken heart in medieval Europe blamed not poor judgment, but sorcery. "I thought she was beautiful, but now I think she's possessed," a line still occasionally used today. Women, predictably, bore the brunt of this theology. A man overcome by desire was tempted. A woman who inspired it was temptress. Beauty was dangerous. Charm was practically criminal. Sermons warned that the devil used women as bait, turning their smiles into snares and their perfume into sin traps. Even married women weren't safe. A husband who adored his wife too much could be accused of loving beyond measure, a slippery slope towards spiritual peril. Apparently, even affection had to be rationed. But while the church tried to separate love and lust, artists and writers gleefully ignored the memo. In romance literature, passion was not only excusable, it was heroic. Lovers defied convention, risked death, and sometimes committed minor heresy for the sake of each other. The very tales that entertained nobles by candlelight were, by ecclesiastical standards, emotional contraband. Yet no bishop could ban them entirely, because even the most pious audience secretly loved a good scandal, especially when it rhymed. Behind all this confusion lay a deeper fear. Love made people unpredictable. It crossed social boundaries, defied arranged marriages, and ignored economic hierarchies. A blacksmith could fall for a baron's daughter. A nun could feel affection for a fellow novice. To medieval authorities, this was anarchy, a kind of emotional heresy. Lust was easier to condemn than love, because lust could be punished, but love could only be envied. So the Middle Ages tried to label what they couldn't control. They called passion a disease, desire a sin, and attraction a temptation. They wrote handbooks, gave sermons, and passed laws, and yet people kept falling in love anyway, stubbornly human, hopelessly predictable. Because for all their moral panic, the heart refused to obey the calendar of the church. In the end, the difference between love and lust in medieval Europe came down to hindsight. If the relationship prospered, it was divine providence. If it imploded, which statistically it often did, it must have been witchcraft. The good news, falling in love meant God smiled upon you. The bad news, breaking up meant Satan was taking notes. If there was one thing the medieval church excelled at, it was having strong opinions, and especially about other people's fun, and few things stirred as much holy anxiety as love magic. From pulpits to confessionals, monks and priests warned that potions, charms and enchanted kisses were tools of Satan designed to turn good Christians into lovesick fools. But behind monastery walls, where curiosity was supposed to die a holy death, something awkward was brewing. Quite literally. While the church thundered against sin, its monks were busy taking notes. The official stance was clear. Love potions were heresy in liquid form. To manipulate affection was to meddle in God's plan, and meddling in God's plan was the spiritual equivalent of poking a bear. Preachers likened love magic to idolatry, worshipping desire instead of the divine. Sermons warned of the eternal punishment for those who boil herbs in lustful deceit. The logic was simple. If God wanted you to fall in love, he'd make it happen naturally. If he didn't, well, there was probably a reason. Do not seek affection by sorcery, wrote one abbot in 1273, lest your heart be warmed by hell's own fire. And yet tucked between those sermons and exorcism manuals were the monks' private journals, full of suspiciously detailed descriptions of the very things they were condemning. Love magic, it seemed, was too fascinating to resist. What began as moral outrage soon turned into academic research, complete with footnotes, Latin diagrams, and excuses so elaborate they could only be divine. Some monks justified their interest as spiritual study. They claimed that by documenting the devil's tricks, they could better protect the faithful. Others, less pious and more bored, just found the subject irresistible. After all, monastic life was repetitive. The same chants, the same bread, the same suspiciously judgmental geese in the cloister. A treatise on the sins of passion was, for some, the medieval equivalent of light reading. Enter Brother Geoffrey, or rather the dozens of Brother Geoffreys across Europe, monks who recorded forbidden knowledge, with the enthusiasm of teenage gossip columnists. They wrote about potion ingredients, incantations, and the alleged effects of various amatory philters. One particularly bold Cistercian noted, "I have seen with mine own eyes how the mandrake root excites the blood." Of course, he didn't explain why he was watching that closely. Monastic curiosity, it seems, was a flexible virtue. Libraries in places like Bologna, Paris, and Salzburg became quiet archives of contradiction. Amid texts on theology and mathematics, monks secretly catalogued folk remedies and magical recipes confiscated from accused witches. In the margins, one might find scribbled observations like, "This herb is said to warm the heart, to be tested cautiously." Others drew diagrams of astrological alignments, carefully noting which phases of the moon corresponded with temptations of Venus. Medieval moral panic looked a lot like modern data collection. Some monasteries even ran controlled experiments, though controlled is doing heavy lifting here. The Benedictine Abbey of St Albans, for instance, had a reputation for scholarly inquiry into forbidden subjects. One 14th century monk, known only as Frater Thomas, wrote a treatise on the physical symptoms of the love sickness. He claimed to have interviewed afflicted men for the sake of diagnosis. The text reads like a mix between medical journal and soap opera. Patient cannot eat, cannot pray, weeps at the sight of women, or indeed at the sight of anything resembling women. You can almost hear his quills shaking with suppressed amusement. Meanwhile, the church hierarchy tried to maintain appearances. Whenever a new batch of heretical manuscripts surfaced, bishops ordered them seized, and then quietly forwarded to universities or monasteries for examination. A suspicious number of these documents ended up not burned, but copied. "We study that we may refute," the monk said, which is exactly what every curious scholar says right before staying up until midnight translating a love charm for research purposes. Not all clergy were hypocrites. Some were genuinely terrified. Confessors recorded frantic parishioners admitting to using love spells, and monks saw firsthand how such confessions spiraled into hysteria and witch trials. The church's fear wasn't entirely irrational. Love magic was being used for manipulation and coercion, but moral panic soon eclipsed reason. By the 15th century, inquisitors were treating even mild flirtation as evidence of diabolical influence. A woman accused of using a love charm could be tortured, while the monk who wrote 5 volumes about it received tenure. Still, the irony persisted. The very people condemning love potions were the ones preserving their recipes for posterity. Without the church's obsessive note-taking, much of what we know about medieval love magic would have vanished. The inquisitors, in their zeal to destroy sorcery, accidentally became its historians. Their manuscripts documented not only the spells, but the fears, the language, and even the humour surrounding them. They wrote so much about forbidden desire that centuries later, scholars began to suspect that monks were the Middle Ages' most dedicated readers of romance. Inside those cloisters, love and sin shared a peculiar intimacy. A monk could write eloquently about divine love by day and by night, copy a confession describing how a woman gave her husband wine steeped in rose and toadstone to gain his favour. Some even used the language of love to describe spiritual devotion, Christ as the bridegroom, the soul as the beloved. In doing so, they blurred the lines between sacred and sensual, between the human longing they condemned and the divine longing they celebrated. Perhaps, deep down, they understood that love, even flawed, messy, mortal love, couldn't truly be exercised. It was too deeply woven into the fabric of humanity. You could sermonize against it, catalogue it, or assign it a footnote in Latin, but you couldn't make it vanish. So the monks kept preaching purity while quietly preserving temptation. Saints by day, scholars by night, and accidental archivists of desire. The good news? Their hypocrisy gave historians a treasure trove of medieval romantic recipes. The bad news? They're all written in Latin, and half of them involve goose fat. Few spectacles reveal the contradictions of the Middle Ages, quite like the witch trials. Half theology, half theatre, an entirely human panic dressed in legal robes. They were not simply about black cats and broomsticks. Many of these trials began with something far less cosmic, a broken heart. Love magic, that innocent-sounding attempt to make someone fall for you, became one of the most common charges in witchcraft cases. It was the easiest sin to accuse, the hardest to disprove, and the most entertaining for spectators. The pattern was predictable. Someone fell in love, someone else didn't. Add jealousy, guilt, and a few mysterious herbs, and suddenly the Inquisition had new business. A man's sudden affection for his neighbour's wife, bewitched, a marriage gone cold, a charm gone wrong. Even ordinary flirtation could spiral into scandal. "She cast her eyes upon me with intent," a farmer once complained in a court record from Savoy. He didn't have evidence of magic, just the unbearable burden of being noticed by a woman. Medieval Europe was an insecure place. Faith demanded virtue, biology demanded everything else. People wanted to explain their impulses without taking responsibility for them. Love magic was the perfect scapegoat. The devil didn't just make you sin, he apparently made you fall in love with the wrong person too. It wasn't me, you could say, it was the potion. And thus, one person's bad decision became another's death sentence. The earliest witch trials that mentioned love potions date back to the 14th century, when church courts began investigating women for using unholy means to gain affection. Some were healers or midwives who had brewed charms, others were merely unlucky enough to be beautiful, independent, or both. In the eyes of inquisitors, feminine appeal was suspicious by default. If you were too attractive, clearly you had help from the devil. If you weren't, clearly you were jealous enough to curse someone who was. It was the perfect no-win scenario, a medieval logic puzzle with a pyre at the end. Interrogations followed a grimly familiar pattern. The accused would be dragged before a panel of priests and magistrates, forced to explain every herb, amulet, and rumour in her possession. A jar of honey? Used for seduction. A dead toad? An offering to Lucifer. A cookbook with stains. Evidence of satanic boiling. Confessions, when they came, were often extracted through persuasion, a term that covered everything from endless questioning to actual torture. Under that kind of pressure, people admitted to anything. One poor widow in the Rhineland confessed to enchanting her neighbour's ox with lust. It's unlikely the court caught the sarcasm, but what's truly striking is how specific the accusations of love magic could be. Court transcripts list all sorts of allegedly diabolical behaviour. Mixing hair into wine, sewing hearts from wax, whispering prayers backwards, even baking biscuits shaped like men. One woman in Italy was accused of enchanting her husband by making him drink water she had bathed in. He admitted the potion worked and he never looked at another woman again, but since he was dead, that probably wasn't the defence she hoped for. The Inquisition, never one to let facts interfere with a good panic, treated such stories as proof of moral decay. They claimed love potions turned people into slaves of the flesh, bound by demonic lust. The irony, of course, is that inquisitors couldn't stop talking about them. Manuals like the Malleus Maleficarum devoted entire chapters to erotic enchantments, describing in scandalous detail how they supposedly worked. The line between condemning sin and publishing softcore theology grew thinner with every page. For the accused, the outcome was rarely merciful. Even acquittal came at a price: humiliation, exile, or lifelong suspicion. In small villages, once your name had been associated with love magic, you could never wash it off. People whispered about your glances, your garden herbs, and even your laundry habits. Washing too often was a sign of vanity, washing too little was a sign of corruption. The sweet spot was apparently muddy but modest. In cities, the trials were larger and crueler. Public morality plays where everyone got to feel righteous by watching someone else burn. Crowds gathered to hear testimonies that blurred the line between fear and gossip. It wasn't uncommon for former lovers to testify against each other. "She bewitched me," cried the man. "He bewitched himself," retorted the woman. Somewhere in the back, an enterprising scribe took notes, because these stories sold. Sometimes, however, the accused fought back with unexpected wit. In one 15th century French case, a woman named Jeanne de Brigue, accused of enchanting her husband, told the inquisitor, "If a man's affection can be stolen by herbs, he wasn't worth keeping." Her executioners called it blasphemy. History calls it a mic drop. Still, the moral panic had momentum. As witch hunts spread across Europe in the 16th and 17th centuries, love magic remained one of the most common gateway crimes. You could be accused of summoning storms or murdering cows, but those accusations often started with something smaller: a jealous neighbour, a failed romance, or a husband's wandering eyes. It turns out the devil didn't need to tempt mankind. Insecurity was doing just fine on its own. The deeper irony was that the church, by condemning love magic so ferociously, gave it legitimacy. Every sermon warning against amatory sorcery convinced more people it existed. The forbidden has always been fascinating, and when priests insisted that love spells were real, even skeptics began to wonder, if the church feared them, maybe they worked. It was a self-sustaining hysteria. Fear fueled belief, belief fueled more fear, and women paid for both. By the time the smoke of the last trials cleared, thousands had been accused and hundreds executed, many for nothing more than understanding herbs, being widowed, or loving unwisely. The witch hunts didn't just destroy lives. They erased generations of female knowledge, silencing midwives, healers, and herbalists under the banner of piety. And yet, centuries later, the stories remain. We still whisper about love potions, magic charms, and cursed attraction, remnants of an age when desire terrified people enough to burn others for it. The good news, the witch hunts ended. The bad news, jealousy didn't. If medieval love potions caused trouble among peasants, they caused absolute chaos among kings. In royal courts, where every fluttering glance could shift alliances and every rumour could topple a throne, a few drops of enchanted cordial could turn passion into political catastrophe. For the rich and powerful, love wasn't just dangerous, it was a liability wrapped in silk and scandal. The higher up the social ladder you climbed, the more expensive and explosive your romances became. A royal affair wasn't a private embarrassment, it was a public crisis. And nothing fueled gossip like the idea that the ruler of an entire kingdom had fallen victim to a love potion. After all, if the king could be bewitched, what hope did anyone else have? Medieval chroniclers adored these tales. They filled royal biographies with insinuations that love had been brewed, not born. It was a convenient explanation for bad decisions, a monarch neglecting state affairs. Clearly he had been ensnared by sorcery. A queen taking a lover? Definitely under a spell. The phrase "it's complicated" hadn't been invented yet, but "the devil made me do it" worked just as well. One of the most infamous examples comes from 14th century France, where Queen Isabeau of Bavaria was accused of using love magic on her husband, King Charles VI, a man who periodically believed he was made of glass. To be fair, the marriage probably needed some intervention. When Charles's sanity collapsed entirely, courtiers whispered that his wife had enchanted his mind with philtrers of passion. In truth, it was more likely hereditary madness and bad governance, but bewitched by his wife made a much juicier headline. Across the Channel, the English court had its own potions and scandals. The tale of Eleanor Cobham, Duchess of Gloucester, remains one of the great cautionary romances of the 15th century. Ambitious, beautiful, and politically savvy, Eleanor married the king's uncle, not for love, but for power. Unfortunately, ambition and affection proved a volatile mix. When her husband's rivals accused her of scheming through sorcery, she was found guilty of using philtres and enchantments to gain her husband's heart and the crown's favour. Her sentence? Public humiliation, lifelong imprisonment, and a permanent mark in the history books as one of England's most elegantly damned women. Then there was Joan of Navarre, the stepmother of Henry V, who in 1419 was accused of plotting to use witchcraft to kill her royal stepson, not out of hatred, but allegedly out of love for another man. She was said to have purchased powders and philtres from necromancers to manipulate the king's will. Whether it was true or just a convenient excuse to strip her of property is anyone's guess. But it proved one thing. In royal politics, the accusation of love magic was more potent than the potion itself. The courts of Italy and Spain were even more theatrical. In Naples, Queen Joanna III was said to have kept a personal apothecary versed in the mysteries of Venus. Her detractors claimed she used elixirs of warmth to control her lovers and cooling draughts to dispose of them when bored. It's difficult to say whether Joanna was truly dosing her boyfriends or simply being a woman with opinions in the 14th century, which, to most medieval chroniclers, was suspicious enough. In Renaissance Florence, where alchemists rubbed elbows with artists, the boundary between science and seduction blurred beautifully. Members of the powerful Medici family were rumoured to dabble in romantic potions as casually as they commissioned portraits. One anecdote tells of a noblewoman who gave her husband a potion of reconciliation, which promptly made him so violently ill that reconciliation became more metaphysical than emotional. Florentines, naturally, concluded she'd used too much love. But not all victims were women. Male rulers also found themselves accused or claimed enchantment as a handy defence. King Philip IV of France famously executed the Knights Templar in 1314, partly because he believed they'd bewitched him and his court through cursed rituals. Centuries later, the rumour persisted that one of his mistresses had used a love charm to dull his judgment. It's amazing how bad governance often got rebranded as unfortunate magical incident. Even popes weren't immune to love magic gossip. Rumours swirled that Pope John XXIV, a notorious critic of sorcery, once secretly investigated an apothecary who sold holy tonics to improve romantic vigour among the clergy. Apparently divine inspiration wasn't always enough. No charges were ever proven, but the story stuck, because in medieval Europe nothing was funnier than a pope investigating Viagra before chemistry existed. The beauty of these accusations was their flexibility. A love potion could explain any political scandal. If a king favoured a mistress, it was enchantment. If he ignored his wife, it was enchantment. If he declared war on a neighbouring country, well, probably enchantment too, but by a different mistress. Magic became the medieval equivalent of a PR statement. Our apologies. His Majesty's behaviour was the result of temporary sorcery. Behind the gossip, however, lay a deeper truth about fear, not of magic itself, but of desire. Powerful men were supposed to rule with reason, yet love made them vulnerable, unpredictable, and human. When a ruler's heart interfered with his duties, the only explanation society could stomach was supernatural manipulation. After all, if kings were God's anointed, then love had to be the devil's distraction. And so the courts filled with paranoia disguised as etiquette. Every glance was analysed, every gift suspected of being an enchanted token. Servants were ordered to taste their master's wine first, not for poison, but for bewitchment. Even perfume became political. One chronicler in Burgundy complained that ladies wear scents to confuse men's senses. In fairness, medieval hygiene made any scent confusing. The irony is that these royal love potion scandals often said more about politics than passion. They were tools, ways to eliminate rivals, humiliate women, or explain royal incompetence without threatening divine order. A failed monarch was a tragedy. A bewitched monarch was a convenient morality tale. In the end, the royal courts of Europe became laboratories of love and lunacy, where affection, ambition, and alchemy mingled like poorly measured ingredients. Some found power through it, others lost their heads, figuratively or otherwise. The good news? If you were accused of seducing the king with magic, you were the talk of the kingdom. The bad news? You better start packing for the convent, or the gallows. If the Middle Ages had Hollywood, it would have been illuminated manuscripts full of knights, saints, and people making fatal beverage decisions. While real alchemists brewed questionable tonics in smoky huts, writers and poets across Europe transformed those same potions into symbols of destiny, passion, and spectacular misfortune. The love potion, half myth, half metaphor, became one of medieval literature's most intoxicating motifs, because nothing said I love you quite like, oops, we're cursed forever. The most famous example, of course, is Tristan and Isolde, the medieval world's answer to Romeo and Juliet, only with more ships, more potions, and slightly fewer survivors. The legend first appeared in Celtic oral tradition, before catching fire in 12th century France, where poets could not resist a good story about passion that ruined absolutely everything. In the tale, the Cornish knight Tristan escorts the beautiful Irish princess Isolde across the sea to marry his uncle King Mark. Unfortunately, during the voyage, they accidentally drink a love potion intended for the bride and groom. Within moments they are doomed, not metaphorically, but cosmically. Their souls are bound in a love so strong it defies kings, gods, and all known marriage contracts. The potion in Tristan and Isolde wasn't just a plot device. It was destiny in liquid form. Medieval audiences didn't view it as accidental poison. They saw it as divine inevitability. Love, after all, was supposed to be uncontrollable, mysterious, and dangerous. The potion gave that idea shape, a way to dramatise the terrifying truth that desire can undo even the noblest heart. And while later moralists wagged fingers at the couple's sin, audiences secretly swooned. Forbidden love was more exciting when it came with an ingredients list. The story spread like wildfire through Europe. Poets retold it in French, German, Italian, and Middle English, each version tweaking the brew to suit local tastes. In some versions, the potion lasted only 3 years, conveniently the length of a medieval attention span, while in others it bound the lovers for eternity. Either way, the result was the same: love as tragedy, chemistry as fate, and everyone dead by the final page. From that moment on, literature couldn't get enough of dangerous drinks. The motif popped up everywhere. In Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, love philters appear as scandalous tools of deceit, often used by ambitious women or gullible men, or both, if Chaucer was feeling particularly cheeky. In The Romance of the Rose, a 13th century French allegory, love itself is described as a kind of potion-induced delirium. The Garden of Desire, the authors claimed, was both paradise and poison, and anyone who entered risked never finding their way out again. Even Arthurian legends weren't safe from the spell of the bottle. In some retellings, Queen Guinevere's affair with Lancelot begins not with longing glances, but with a draught of Venus. Conveniently, this let chroniclers blame a little chemistry instead of criticising the Queen of England for fraternising with her husband's favourite knight. In the moral math of medieval romance, infidelity was still sinful unless you could pin it on pharmaceuticals. For poets, the love potion was a narrative goldmine because it captured what medieval audiences already believed. Love was a force greater than willpower. It could exalt you or destroy you, sometimes both before lunch. The potion became shorthand for that uncontrollable, almost divine madness that people both feared and desired. To drink it was to surrender your autonomy, your reason, and quite often your pulse. But there was another, quieter layer beneath all the tragedy: the commentary on choice. Medieval writers were obsessed with whether humans could control their passions or were doomed by fate. The love potion embodied that tension perfectly. Tristan and Isolde didn't choose love, it chose them, ruthlessly. Readers could sympathise with their suffering while still feeling morally superior. Poor souls, the audience sighed. They were bewitched. Translation: this is very moving, but thank goodness my spouse can't read. By the 14th century, the idea had become so ingrained that potion no longer meant literal drink. It became a metaphor for love itself. Courtly poets described eyes as philters, glances as brews, kisses as draughts of delight. Every exchange of affection was imagined as chemical combustion. One troubadour wrote, "Her smile intoxicates more than wine." Another warned, "He who drinks of her voice shall thirst forever." Medieval romance had fully embraced its inner chemist. Even when the Renaissance dawned and scholars began replacing superstition with science, writers refused to give up their magical metaphors. Shakespeare inherited the entire tradition and ran with it, most famously in A Midsummer Night's Dream, where a fairy love potion causes everyone to fall for the wrong person. It was a comic take on the same medieval anxiety. Love is unpredictable, undignified, and impossible to control. The difference was no one got executed at the end and just embarrassed. Progress of a sort. Yet for all its doom and drama, the medieval love potion remained oddly relatable. People then, as now, longed for shortcuts to affection, for proof that destiny could be bottled and consumed. The potion symbolised both hope and hubris, the eternal temptation to play alchemist with the heart. To modern readers, it might sound absurd. To medieval ones, it was terrifyingly plausible. In a world where a fever could kill you, why wouldn't love be equally lethal? It's easy to mock the melodrama now, but those old romances understood something profound. The potion wasn't just about magic, it was about risk. Every love story, even today, carries a trace of that ancient brew. The idea that passion transforms, consumes, and sometimes ruins us. Tristan and Isolde just happened to put it in writing, with a fatal sip. The good news, they achieved immortal love. The bad news, they had to die first to get it. By the late Middle Ages, love magic had become so widespread that the Church decided it was time to wage holy war, not against heretics, not against pagans, but against romance itself. The clergy had seen enough frogs, herbs, and questionable beverages to last several centuries. To them, the real enemy wasn't the devil in disguise, but the dangerously persuasive idea that human affection could be mixed, bottled, and swallowed. So they fought back the only way they knew how, with sermons, confessionals, and a firm belief that the only acceptable aphrodisiac was guilt. To medieval priests, desire wasn't a feeling, it was a diagnosis. The Church rebranded love as a spiritual illness, a fever of the soul that could only be cured through prayer and penance. If your heart raced, your thoughts wandered, or you smiled too much at someone other than your spouse, congratulations, you were spiritually unwell, and much like medieval medicine, the cure tended to make the condition worse. Confessors began listing inappropriate affection right alongside theft and blasphemy. Manuals for clergy instructed them to ask probing questions like, do you gaze too fondly upon another? Have you used sense to inspire affection? Have you danced, sung, or laughed excessively in the company of men? The last one, incidentally, could also get you fined for witchcraft. Joy, it seemed, was the first symptom of sin. The Church's official line was clear. Real love came from God. False love came from chemistry, which in their defence was an accurate observation given the state of medieval potion-making. Sermons condemned lust as the fire of the body that consumes the soul. Bishops wrote pamphlets warning that infatuation was the devil's inflammation. Even the vocabulary of romance turned medical. Love was a contagion, temptation a rash, passion a wound. And who treated wounds? Not doctors, but priests. When in doubt, they didn't call a physician. They called a confessor and hoped for the best. Churches even developed rituals for the lovesick. In some regions, priests offered blessings for deliverance from unholy desire. A special prayer might be recited over those who couldn't stop thinking about someone they shouldn't. Some parishes had water sanctified for chastity, drinkable holy water, guaranteed to cool the blood. It rarely worked as intended. Many parishioners found themselves back in confession a week later, sheepishly explaining that the holy water of self-control had only made them thirsty. Monasteries and convents also became unofficial treatment centres for passion. Troubled nobles would send their wayward children to spend a reflective season among the devout. The hope was that silence, fasting, and endless psalm recitations would drive out desire. Unfortunately, locking attractive, lonely people in close quarters for long stretches of time had the opposite effect. Letters from abbeys are filled with confessions of spiritual affection that read suspiciously like love letters with extra Latin. The church had tried to suppress passion and ended up creating the world's least supervised dating retreat. But priests didn't just want to cure individuals, they wanted to control the narrative. For centuries, love stories had been the domain of poets and troubadours, full of passion, rebellion, and fatal kisses. The church countered with its own brand of holy romance, the saintly love story. These tales replaced lust with piety, transforming emotional intensity into divine devotion. Instead of dying for a lover, you now died for God, a symbolic upgrade with roughly the same fatality rate. The most famous example was the life of St. Cecilia, who rejected her husband's advances and converted him to Christianity instead. Her chastity became the new love potion, potent, pure, and utterly unattainable. The message was clear. The only safe form of affection was the kind that involved absolutely no touching, feeling, or visible enjoyment. The medieval church basically invented the no dating until marriage policy, and then raised the stakes by requiring a vow of silence too. Clergy also launched public campaigns against folk healers and potion sellers. In towns across Europe, priests held ceremonies to purify markets, sprinkling holy water over stalls that sold herbs or charms, which must have been fun for the vendors trying to keep their mandrakes dry. Preachers warned that even carrying a love charm could attract demonic possession. People began confessing to having unholy thoughts after touching rosemary, which must have made cooking dinner an ethical nightmare. Still, for all its zeal, the church's crusade against desire was full of contradictions. Many clergymen secretly read the same romantic literature they condemned. Some even adapted the language of courtly love into their sermons. Christ became the heavenly beloved, and the soul was cast as his yearning bride. The metaphors were meant to be spiritual, but the tone was, shall we say, enthusiastic. One friar famously compared divine ecstasy to the sweetness of the beloved's embrace, and his peers agreed that he was perhaps a bit too inspired. Meanwhile, love didn't go away. It simply went underground. People still flirted, still fell in love, still bought suspicious tonics in unmarked jars. The only difference was that now they also felt guilty about it. The church had successfully merged romance and repentance into one exhausting emotional cocktail. Medieval lovers couldn't even write a sonnet without wondering if it counted as evidence in a future confession. Yet in its own strange way, the church's efforts left a lasting mark on how Europe thought about love. By turning desire into a moral issue, it gave birth to the idea of romantic conscience, that love isn't just a feeling, but a struggle between body and soul. Every Valentine's Day moral panic, every tragic love story about passion versus virtue, owes a little something to those medieval priests and their holy paperwork. The good news? The church gave us poetry, devotion, and a language of love that still lingers. The bad news? They also gave us centuries of people feeling sinful for enjoying it. In the Middle Ages, heartbreak wasn't just tragic, it was diagnosable. The medieval world, always eager to categorize misery, classified lovesickness as a legitimate medical and spiritual disorder. Physicians, priests, and philosophers all agreed that being hopelessly in love was a terrible health condition that required immediate treatment. Unfortunately, medieval medicine treated it with all the subtlety of a hammer. If your heart ached, they wouldn't give you chocolate and a good creak. They'd give you fasting, bloodletting, and a few cheerful reminders about hell. The roots of this romantic hypochondria go back to ancient Greece. Philosophers like Hippocrates and Galen believed that love caused a dangerous imbalance in the body's humours, the four mystical fluids that governed personality and health: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. When love struck, they said, it overheated the blood, clouded the brain, and made the heart behave like a spoiled furnace. By the time this theory reached the medieval scholars, it had evolved into something much grimmer. Love as fever, passion as pathology. Physicians of the 12th and 13th centuries took the condition seriously. The medical textbook Viaticum described lovesickness as a wasting of the soul that consumes the flesh. Symptoms included insomnia, sighing, Loss of appetite, paleness, weeping, distraction, and staring blankly into space. Essentially every teenager's love life ever. The prescription? Remove the cause. If the cause was a woman, well, good luck with that. The go-to physical treatments were not for the faint of heart. Bloodletting was the universal medieval solution to any ailment, whether you had a fever, a headache, or an inconvenient crush. Doctors reasoned that since love was a heating of the blood, you simply needed less blood. Patients were bled from the arm, the ankle, or, for particularly dramatic cases, near the heart itself. The idea was to cool the passion. In reality, it mostly cooled the patient's enthusiasm for living. Next came fasting, a remedy beloved by both physicians and priests. If you couldn't stop thinking about your beloved, perhaps hunger would distract you. Many monasteries even prescribed fasting as penance for unholy affection. One 14th century abbot cheerfully advised, "Let him who burns with passion dine not on meat, lest his desires grow strong. Let him instead eat lentils and pray for mercy." Lentils, of course, being the traditional food of people who have given up on everything. For those still unconvinced by the power of starvation, there was always leech therapy. Doctors believed leeches could draw out the excess hot blood responsible for desire. If your heart was racing, a few slimy assistants would be applied to the chest, groin, or, for extra piety, the temples. Some medical texts recommended the forehead, because nothing says "I'm over you" like walking around with a blood-sucking sticker on your face. Then there were the more creative cures. Some healers recommended cold baths, claiming the shock would chill the humours of lust. Others prescribed sleeping on hard boards or wearing scratchy garments to remind you that comfort was the enemy of virtue. In more extreme cases, monks suggested pilgrimage, walking hundreds of miles in sandals to forget your beloved. By the time you reached the shrine, you might not remember your own name, let alone theirs. Priests had their own toolbox of cures, mostly involving spiritual warfare. Love, after all, was viewed as temptation, and temptation required exorcism. Parishioners confessed their infatuations as sins, sometimes being assigned vigils, staying awake all night praying, or flagellation, beating the desire out quite literally. "Each lash drives out a thought of lust," wrote one particularly enthusiastic Dominican. It's hard to say whether it worked, but it did prove that medieval therapy was nothing if not hands-on. Not everyone accepted this suffering without question. Some physicians began suggesting that moderate affection might actually be good for the health. The 12th century Arab physician Avicenna, whose works were widely read in Europe, described love as a mental disturbance curable by the sight of the beloved. In other words, rather than bleeding the patient, he recommended letting them see, or better yet, marry, the object of affection. Sadly, European doctors ignored the sensible part and kept the bleeding. Still, for the upper classes, lovesickness became almost fashionable, a mark of sensitivity, intellect, and refinement. Noblemen swooned publicly, noble women sighed poetically, and everyone pretended their emotional meltdowns were proof of superior character. Physicians even learned to flatter their patients while diagnosing them. "My lord, your humours are too noble for common reason." In practice, that meant, "You're lovesick, but at least it's deluxe." The church naturally saw this as moral backsliding, so priests doubled down on their holy remedies. They blessed amulets inscribed with verses like, "Turn my heart from fleshly desire," and advised lovesick parishioners to sleep with a crucifix under their pillow. Others prescribed pilgrimage by proxy. If you couldn't make the journey yourself, you could pay someone else to walk and pray on your behalf. Medieval version of ghosting with extra paperwork. The real irony was that many of these treatments probably did work, not because of theology, but because of exhaustion. After days of fasting, nights of prayer, and a round of bloodletting, most sufferers were too weak to feel anything, romantic or otherwise. The heartbreak faded simply because so did consciousness. Over time, the church's approach evolved from punishment to prevention. Preachers warned young men to avoid songs, dances, and perfumes, all considered gateways to temptation. One 15th century sermon even claimed that Music in minor keys leads to longing. Apparently the devil's favourite instrument was the lute. Moral hygiene, not just bodily hygiene, became the goal. Don't flirt, don't fantasize, and above all, don't dance too enthusiastically, because in medieval logic, rhythm was halfway to ruin. And yet, despite all the flagellation, fasting, and faith-based fatigue, love never truly yielded to medicine or morality. People still wrote poems, still exchanged flowers, still carved initials into wooden pews while pretending to pray. No amount of leeching could cure humanity's oldest ailment, the stubborn refusal to stop wanting each other. The good news, heartbreak was survivable if you survived the treatment. The bad news, the cure for love might just make you miss being sick. By the late Middle Ages, love wasn't just an emotion, it was an economy. Behind the curtains of cathedrals and under the stalls of bustling markets, love magic had evolved into one of Europe's most profitable shadow industries. Forget grain, salt, or silk, the most valuable commodity was hope, and there was never a shortage of customers. This was the age when heartbreak met entrepreneurship. The potion peddlers of old had grown into an informal network of charm makers, matchmakers, and self-taught alchemists, a medieval emotional supply chain stretching from city alleys to noble courts. Love might have been free, but its ingredients certainly weren't. Whether you were a duchess seeking a husband's affection, or a farmhand pining after the blacksmith's daughter, someone was ready to sell you a solution, for the right price, naturally. The business of love magic thrived precisely because it was forbidden. The church's ban on potions didn't stop people from buying them, it just made them more expensive. Scarcity, secrecy, and hair proved to be excellent marketing tools. The harder something was to obtain, the more powerful it was believed to be. Guaranteed to work, said the peddlers, or your soul back. At the top of this romantic food chain were professional charm sellers, often disguised as herbalists or fortune-tellers. In larger cities like Florence, Paris, and London, they set up consulting rooms that looked suspiciously like modern therapy offices, minus the confidentiality. Their clientele included lonely widows, jealous wives, ambitious lovers, and occasionally priests who wanted to better understand temptation. Appointments were made discreetly, sometimes through coded language. A potion for courage meant lust, a powder for warmth meant seduction, and ointment for cold hearts meant, well, that one didn't need much translation. Each product came with its own price tier. For a few copper coins, you could buy a simple charm, usually a small bag of herbs, blessed with some muttered Latin and sealed with thread. For a silver piece, you could upgrade to a liquid potion, complete with fancy bottle and exclusive ingredients. Read, random spices, rose petals, or occasionally crushed insects. But the premium packages, the ones sold to nobles and merchants, could cost a month's wages. These promised divine intervention, astrological timing, and, for the especially gullible, ingredients imported from the Holy Land, which suspiciously always looked like parsley. The economics of it all were surprisingly sophisticated. Love magic was an industry that ran on repeat customers. Every satisfied client was a walking advertisement, and every failed potion was an opportunity to upsell. If the first elixir didn't work, clearly Venus wasn't in the right phase. "Come back next week," said the merchant, "and we'll adjust your formula." It was less a love industry and more an emotional pyramid scheme, the kind where the only thing guaranteed to multiply was the seller's profit margin. And then there were the subscription models. In some regions, customers could pay a small weekly fee for ongoing enchantments. This meant that the charm seller would light candles, chant prayers, or bury symbolic tokens on behalf of the client, all invisible services that conveniently couldn't be verified. The customer might not know if the ritual worked, but they certainly knew the merchant was still praying, at least until the money ran out. For peasants, the love market looked different, but was no less vibrant. Travelling fairs often featured heart booths, tiny tents run by local wise women who sold love charms alongside potions for warts and toothaches. A small coin might get you a ribbon, touched by Venus, actually dyed cloth, or a wax heart pierced with pins to draw affection. For many, these charms offered more than romance. They were insurance against loneliness in a world that had very few cures for it. Meanwhile, in the cities, apothecaries discovered a lucrative grey area. Officially, they sold medicine. Unofficially, they stocked private formulas for ailments that doctors didn't discuss. One Italian inventory from the 15th century lists among its wares powder of delight, water of the heart, and oil for tender thoughts. Prices were conveniently unlisted because true love, like good wine, was sold by negotiation. The trade extended far beyond Europe. Venetian merchants imported love spices from the East, cinnamon, nutmeg, saffron, which were said to stir the blood. In reality, they were just expensive and smelled nice, but that was enough. Affection had become a globalized fantasy, shipped by sea and sold by weight. Love magic wasn't just a superstition anymore. It was commerce with branding. Of course, where there's profit, there's exploitation. Not everyone sold romance. Some sold revenge. The same merchants who brewed filters of affection also offered charms of cooling, subtle poisons meant to end desire, or life entirely. Love and death came from the same shelf, sometimes even the same vial, depending on how much you paid. "A true merchant," said one cynical chronicler, "loves all hearts equally, so long as they're paying coin." Still, this thriving black market spoke to something profoundly human. In a world with no dating apps, no therapists, and no guarantees, people still wanted to feel wanted. The potions, charms, and powders weren't really magic, they were comfort. Buying them gave people the illusion of agency in matters of the heart, a sense that love could be earned, not just endured. The merchant's real product wasn't the potion, it was hope. Authorities tried to crack down, city councils banned women of suspicious trade, inquisitors raided herbal shops, and bishops issued fiery edicts. But the love economy was unstoppable. You can outlaw ingredients, but not longing. Within weeks, new sellers popped up in different alleys offering wholly approved versions of the same thing, now with extra prayer included. And while the merchants grew rich, their customers grew poorer, chasing happiness one vial at a time. Some found love, some found indigestion, and some found themselves at confession explaining both. But through it all, the trade thrived, because no matter the age, love has always been recession-proof. The good news, the love industry created jobs for thousands. The bad news, none of them came with emotional refunds. By the late medieval period, Europe's obsession with love potions wasn't an isolated fad. It was part of a global exchange of ideas, ingredients, and occasionally chaos. The spice routes didn't just carry pepper, silk, and gold, they carried recipes for dessert. From Cairo to Constantinople, Delhi to Damascus, ships and caravans were busy transporting humanity's most universal problem, romance. Because even when trade was dangerous, love was always worth importing, right next to silk and regret. The story of love magic is, in many ways, the story of globalization before the word existed. Medieval Europe didn't invent potions for passion. It borrowed them, sometimes respectfully, often recklessly. The Crusades, pilgrimages, and merchant voyages had opened channels of cultural exchange that blended science, superstition, and sensuality in equal measure. The result was an international laboratory of love, where aphrodisiacs, charms, and philosophies of attraction were constantly being reinterpreted to fit local tastes, much like cuisine, only significantly riskier. The Arab world, the science of desire, where was the chemistry of love more intellectually explored than in the medieval Islamic world? Scholars in cities like Baghdad, Cordoba, and Cairo weren't just cataloguing herbs, they were analysing emotions. Think of it as the golden age of romantic R&D. Arab physicians such as Avicenna, Ibn Sina, and Al-Razi approached love not as witchcraft, but as medicine. In Avicenna's Canon of Medicine, love is described as a mental disorder resulting from fixation of thought upon an image. The cure, he advised, was to find the object of affection, or at least distract the patient before they started writing poetry. But alongside this medical seriousness was an entire literature of charm-making and affection medicines. Arabic alchemists compiled treatises on mahabba, love magic, that combined astrology, psychology and pharmacology. They experimented with musk, ambergris, saffron and honey, ingredients prized both for their fragrance and their association with warmth, vitality and fertility. Some even recorded the specific times one should prepare these brews based on planetary alignments, a detail that European monks would later borrow wholesale, pretending it was divine inspiration rather than import. Trade caravans carried these ideas westward. Venetian merchants returning from Alexandria didn't just bring spices, they brought stories. Rumours spread that the Arabs had discovered elixirs of joy and powders of attraction. In reality, most were combinations of aromatic herbs and stimulants, but Europe's imagination did the rest. When medieval apothecaries began mixing Eastern powders, they were essentially recreating Arabic recipes, but with worse handwriting and a lot more guesswork. India, the sensual science. Further east, India had already perfected the art of sensual alchemy centuries before Europe learned to wash its hands. The Ayurvedic tradition treated love and desire as vital aspects of health, not moral failings. Ancient texts like the Kama Sutra and Karaka Samhita detailed aphrodisiacs, Vajikarana, designed to strengthen both the body and the spirit. Indian love tonics featured ingredients like ashwagandha, a root still popular today, sandalwood, saffron and honey, infused with ghee and spices. Some recipes called for moon-bathed herbs, plants picked under specific lunar phases to harness cosmic energy. Unlike Europe's panic-stricken priests, Indian physicians saw passion as part of natural balance, something to harmonize, not suppress. Through the Silk Road, these ideas trickled into Persia and Arabia, where they were adapted and then shipped again by land, sea and rumour toward Europe. It's no coincidence that medieval love potions often included saffron, nutmeg and cardamom, spices that originated from India's trade networks. By the 14th century, a European noble sipping a love cordial was unknowingly consuming an Ayurvedic philosophy in liquid form. China, balance, breath, and the art of attraction. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, Chinese scholars were exploring love through the lens of yin and yang, the eternal dance of opposing forces. Desire wasn't a sin, it was a natural energy that, if mismanaged, could cause illness or imbalance. Taoist medical texts described passion as a kind of internal alchemy, the union of yin, feminine energy, and yang, masculine energy, produced not just pleasure, but vitality and long life. Aphrodisiac recipes abounded in China too, though they were far more sophisticated than Europe's frog leg experiments. Ingredients like ginseng, cinnamon bark, lotus seeds and goji berries were prized for enhancing stamina and spirit. Some Taoist practitioners took this to extremes, claiming that perfectly balanced intimacy could literally extend one's lifespan. Europe, meanwhile, was still trying to survive its own bathwater. Chinese texts made their way westward, via Mongol intermediaries and traders along the Silk Road. When fragments of these ideas reached Arab scholars, they were translated into treatises that eventually landed in European libraries, often stripped of context but not of intrigue. Thus, European alchemists began to borrow Chinese and Indian ideas without realizing it, believing they were uncovering the universal secrets of love. The Great Medieval Remix. By the 14th century, the Mediterranean had become a melting pot of emotional commerce. Egyptian musk met Indian spice, Chinese ginseng met Italian honey, and everyone pretended it was their own invention. Apothecaries blended ingredients from 3 continents, each adding a dash of local superstition. A Venetian might mix cinnamon and saffron with wine for passion. A French courtier might burn ambergris and chant Latin verses for affection. A London merchant might just sell all 3 and call it universal love powder. What's astonishing is how much cross-cultural respect this trade fostered, at least until someone was accused of witchcraft. A Christian nun might secretly copy Arabic texts on perfumes, while a Muslim physician might quote Plato to explain attraction. In an era obsessed with difference, love magic was the one subject where everyone agreed. The heart was as unpredictable as global shipping routes. And yet, beneath all the trade and translation, the human impulse stayed the same. Whether it came from a Persian apothecary, an Indian temple, or a European monk's cupboard, every potion told the same story. Someone wanted to be loved and was willing to risk everything for it. The good news, love connected the medieval world in ways religion never could. The bad news, so did counterfeit saffron. By the dawn of the Renaissance, love potions had lost a bit of their flavour, metaphorically and thankfully literally. After centuries of frogs, nightshade and suspicious bodily ingredients, Europe began to discover something even more powerful than magic: thinking. The age of reason was on the horizon, and with it came the slow, painful death of one of humanity's most profitable delusions. Love was no longer a disease to be cured or a spell to be brewed. It was an emotion to be understood. And nothing kills a good superstition faster than a philosopher with a notebook. For centuries, the church and the apothecaries had played emotional tug-of-war over Europe's heart. Now the scholars were stepping in, armed with Greek manuscripts, anatomy lessons, and a startling conviction that maybe, just maybe, boiling frogs didn't create affection. As Renaissance humanism spread, so did the idea that love came from conversation, not cauldrons. Courtly flirtation, poetry, and social wit replaced witchy brews as the main methods of attraction, which frankly was progress. Fewer side effects, better breath. The early humanists approached love the way they approached everything else, with diagrams, moral essays, and far too much confidence. Thinkers like Marsilio Ficino, the 15th century Florentine philosopher, began writing about platonic love, a concept that politely removed lust from the equation and replaced it with intellectual admiration. According to Ficino, true love wasn't about potions or passion. It was about recognizing divine beauty in another person's soul. It was all very noble and conveniently unrequited. Still, this new platonic version of affection spread like wildfire among Europe's educated classes. Suddenly, everyone wanted to be admired for their mind instead of their cheekbones. Noble women hosted salons where men debated the nature of virtue instead of comparing love charms. Flirting became an art of conversation, not concoction. For the first time in centuries, winning someone's affection involved listening, which, for some, must have felt like witchcraft of an entirely new kind. The Renaissance also gave birth to a quieter revolution. Science, the new anatomists and natural philosophers began peering into bodies, dissecting the physical world instead of the spiritual one. What they found was blood, organs, and nerves, but no sign of love potions, humours, or invisible cupids. Physicians like Andreas Vesalius and Paracelsus started questioning everything the medieval doctors had taken for granted. Paracelsus, the eccentric Swiss alchemist turned scientist, famously declared that love was a natural magnetism of the heart, not a demon's trick. To be fair, he also thought diseases came from astral vapours, but improvement. He proposed that chemistry, not sorcery, had governed human attraction, suggesting that emotions were influenced by bodily processes and the balance of substances within. This was the Renaissance's way of saying, it's not you, it's your biochemistry. Meanwhile, the courts of Europe were undergoing their own transformation. The noble love potion had gone out of fashion, replaced by perfume, poetry, and carefully orchestrated banter. In the French court of Catherine de' Medici, conversation was the new alchemy. Suitors wooed with clever metaphors instead of mysterious elixirs. Love became theatrical, linguistic, a game of intellect and charm, rather than frogs and arsenic. As one courtier put it, a sharp tongue now wins more hearts than a sharp knife. The printing press helped accelerate this intellectual detox. By the 16th century, pamphlets and books circulated debunking the old ways. Physicians warned that many love potions were nothing but dangerous nonsense. Philosophers mocked the idea that herbs could bend emotions. Even poets began turning on the trend. Shakespeare, ever the opportunist, parodied the entire love potion trope in A Midsummer Night's Dream, turning magical infatuation into a slapstick disaster. The audience laughed because by then they knew better. Science had ruined everything by suggesting emotional intelligence. And yet, despite the shift toward reason, the legacy of love magic didn't vanish overnight, it merely retreated into fashion. The ingredients changed, but the dream remained. Instead of buying mandrake or henbane, people bought imported perfumes, exotic spices, and lace handkerchiefs blessed by Venus. The same desire for enchantment now wore silk gloves and spoke Latin. The potion bottle had evolved into the perfume flask, the ritual into flirtation, the witch into the courtesan. There was also money in this new rational love. Artists painted allegories of Cupid and Psyche. Playwrights wrote tragedies of doomed desire. Printers sold romance manuals promising to teach the art of gallantry. Emotional manipulation hadn't disappeared. It had just gone mainstream. The love potion industry collapsed only to rebrand itself as self-improvement. Meanwhile, the church, ever adaptable, quietly shifted its stance. Instead of condemning love outright, it began promoting marriage as the divine institution, the acceptable outlet for passion. Desire within wedlock became holy. Outside it, still a fast track to hell. Sermons softened, confessions became less dramatic, and priests no longer blamed every crush on demons. They left that job to moral philosophers, who were even more tedious. By the late 16th century, love magic had become a cultural relic, mocked by scholars and dramatised by writers. The educated laughed at the superstition of their ancestors, though privately, many still carried lucky charms or whispered prayers before confessing affection. Rationality, it turned out, didn't eliminate insecurity. It just made people more articulate about it. In Italy, where Renaissance flirtation reached Olympic levels, lovers exchanged letters dripping with classical references and coded poetry. Gone were the crude brews of yesteryear. Now the most dangerous potion was a metaphorical one, crafted from words. A glance may poison faster than a draught, wrote one humanist poet, proving that while superstition died, melodrama did not. And so, as Europe stepped into the modern age, love potions faded from practice but lingered in imagination. They survived in art, song and symbolism, reminders of an era when passion was brewed by hand and sold by candlelight. What replaced them wasn't necessarily wiser, just subtler. The cauldron gave way to conversation, the potion to perfume, the spell to charm. The good news? Humanity finally learned that love couldn't be bottled. The bad news? We immediately started bottling eau de romance instead. You might think we've outgrown the superstition of love potions, that humanity, armed with centuries of science, finally learned you can't bottle affection. And yet, stroll through any department store, scroll through any dating advice blog, or watch 10 minutes of modern advertising and you'll quickly realise we're still drinking the same potion, just with better packaging. The only thing that's really changed is the label. Now it says confidence, pheromones, or self-care. Different words, same delusion. In the medieval era, potion sellers whispered about charms that could inflame desire. Today, it's perfume ads that murmur promises of irresistible magnetism, accompanied by a slow-motion model emerging from mist, while a deep voice whispers, the scent of power. The frog legs are gone, thankfully, but the marketing spell remains unbroken. Humanity, it seems, will never stop paying extra to feel interesting. The lineage between those old filters and our modern perfumes is surprisingly direct. When Renaissance alchemists gave up on literal love potions, they turned their focus to aromatics. Fragrance was still seen as a conduit for emotion, a way to stimulate attraction without invoking demons, a real win for public relations. Apothecaries who once sold powders of passion simply rebranded them as waters of pleasure or essences of allure. The ingredients, ambergris, musk and rose oil, were the same ones medieval potion makers once used in their elixirs of affection. The goal remained unchanged, to make someone fall for you, or at least stand closer for a few seconds. By the 18th century, perfumes had gone fully mainstream, transforming from moral hazard to social necessity. French perfumers marketed scent as a science of seduction, borrowing both language and mystique from the love potions of old. The essence of Venus, the spirit of attraction, the elixir of charm. These were not metaphors, but literal product names. Nobles carried tiny vials of perfume on chains around their necks, ready to dab their wrists before social encounters. They may not have believed in witchcraft anymore, but they definitely believed in chemistry, the kind that came in a bottle and cost half a servant's annual wage. Fast forward to today, and the fantasy has only evolved. Modern marketing may avoid the word potion, but the implication is alive and well. Fragrance companies now hire neuroscientists to explain how certain scents activate pleasure centers in the brain. The language sounds scientific, but the goal hasn't changed since medieval markets, to turn emotion into commerce. Swap the herbalist's stall for an airbrushed billboard, and it's the same hustle. Guaranteed attraction, says the label, conveniently omitting the small print that reads, results may vary depending on hygiene and personality. Even the idea of aphrodisiacs, those edible cousins of love potions, refuses to die. Medieval charm makers swore by oysters, honey, and spuds. Modern wellness brands swear by ginseng, maca, and something called horny goatweed, a name that sounds less like an herb and more like a bad dating app. Supplements promise to ignite desire, rekindle intimacy, and boost vitality. Medieval buyers were told they were buying magic. We're told we're buying biochemistry. Either way, the checkout process looks suspiciously similar. The cosmetic and self-help industries have perfected what medieval alchemists could only dream of: mass production of insecurity. In the 15th century, love potion peddlers preyed on people's loneliness. In the 21st, companies prey on their self-esteem. Need confidence before a date? There's a spray for that. Want to manifest love? There's a crystal set. Want your ex back? There's a reconciliation candle scented with bergamot and delusion. Every age gets the snake oil it deserves. The parallels don't stop at perfume counters. The internet has become the new medieval marketplace, where influencers play the role of modern potion sellers. Instead of chanting in alleys, they whisper on TikTok, "Here's how to make them obsessed with you." They sell manifestation oils, attraction rituals, and energetic sprays that promise to align your frequency with your soulmate. It's the same promise that medieval sellers made with frogs and parsley, only now it comes with pastel branding and express shipping. What's fascinating, though, is how the myth of bottled attraction continues to evolve with technology. In the age of dating apps, algorithms have replaced alchemy. We no longer brew to find love, we swipe. But the fantasy remains the same, that there's a formula, a shortcut, a trick to make someone love you. In medieval Europe, it was mandrake root under a full moon. Today, it's the perfect profile picture under golden hour lighting. Different century, same desperate optimism. Psychologists might say these products work because of the placebo effect. Belief itself has power. Medieval lovers believed potions worked, so they acted bolder, more confident, more charming. Modern buyers of pheromone sprays often report the same, not because others smell anything different, but because they feel different. In that sense, the medieval potion makers weren't entirely wrong. Belief is the most potent ingredient of all, and let's not forget modern luxury branding, which still borrows its imagery straight from old alchemical fantasy. Gold lettering, mysterious Latin names, smoky glass bottles. Perfume packaging could easily pass for something sold at a 14th century occult fair. The aura of secrecy is part of the appeal. People don't just buy scent, they buy mystery, identity, and the illusion of control over how others feel about them. The modern potion bottle is just shinier, cleaner, and costs about as much as a medieval dowry. Yet beneath the marketing, there's something deeply human about it all. The desire to be loved, desired, or even noticed. It's timeless. Every generation invents its own rituals to make that happen, whether it's drinking henbane or buying confidence in a bottle. We may scoff at medieval superstitions, but when you think about it, our entire advertising industry runs on the same logic. Mix hope, add scarcity, stir with insecurity, and sell for a profit. So yes, the ingredients have changed, and no one's boiling frogs anymore, we hope. But the medieval dream of controlling love through scent, touch, or chemistry never really died. It just got rebranded, focus tested, and given a celebrity endorsement. The good news, modern potions probably won't kill you. The bad news, they'll still drain your wallet and maybe your dignity. For all its superstition smoke and questionable use of amphibians, the medieval world left behind something that still defines us today, the dream that love can be mastered. The story of medieval love potions isn't really about herbs or witchcraft, it's about control, about trying to bend something chaotic, terrifying, and beautiful into submission. Because love, for all its poetry, has always been a problem in need of management. The Middle Ages didn't invent bad romantic decisions, they just gave them better packaging. From castle halls to peasant cottages, every drop of potion, every whispered charm, every forbidden brew was humanity's declaration of war against uncertainty. Love, after all, made people irrational, and medieval people were already halfway there. They lived in a world of plagues, wars, and divine punishments. Falling in love was just another unpredictable disaster. A potion, by contrast, promised order. It turned emotion into a recipe, measurable, repeatable, purchasable. It was alchemy for the heart. Take chaos, add herbs, and pretend you're in control. The allure of that illusion hasn't faded. We've traded mandrake roots for therapy apps, astrological charts for dating algorithms, but the instinct is the same, to seek formulas for feelings. The medieval world's bubbling cauldron became our search bar. How to make someone love you, best time to text back, 10 scientifically proven ways to appear irresistible. Our methods evolved, our anxiety did not. In its own twisted way, love magic democratized romance. It gave peasants, widows, and servants, people with no political power, a sense of agency in their emotional lives. For a few coins, a woman could feel she had influence over her fate. A lonely man could believe that affection was within reach. Sure, the potion might just be cabbage water and optimism, but for those trapped by class and custom, it was empowerment in liquid form. In that sense, love magic was the Middle Ages' most subversive invention, a rebellion disguised as romance. But it also revealed society's deep unease with emotion, and especially with women's emotion. The obsession with love potions exposed a fear that desire, if left unchecked, could topple hierarchies. A passionate queen was political instability, an independent widow was a witch, an affectionate monk was a scandal waiting to happen. So the culture drew boundaries, moralized feelings, and punished those who crossed them. Love potions weren't just about affection, they were about the threat of losing control, both personal and social. That fear too lingers. Modern society might not burn witches, but it still distrusts people, especially women, who wield too much allure. Manipulative, crazy, obsessive, too emotional. The vocabulary changed, the suspicion didn't. The medieval notion that love was dangerous unless supervised by morality survives every time someone labels passion as pathology. The potion may be gone, but the paranoia remains. There's also irony in how the same institutions that once condemned love magic ended up preserving it. The church denounced amatory philters, yet monks copied their recipes for academic purposes. Physicians ridiculed folk remedies, yet studied them in Latin manuscripts. Poets mocked the superstition, then romanticized it into legend. Every generation that tried to destroy the myth only made it more interesting. The love potion, it turns out, was the perfect metaphor, couldn't be contained. Over centuries, it transformed from heresy to art, from crime to metaphor. In literature, it became tragedy, Tristan and Isolde. In comedy, it became chaos, A Midsummer Night's Dream, and in modern marketing, it became cologne. What began as rural sorcery ended as the perfume counter at Dior. The evolution is almost poetic, from witchcraft to commerce, from forbidden to fashionable. Humanity didn't stop chasing enchantment, it just learned to monetize it. Yet beyond the humour and absurdity, there's something profoundly touching in this legacy. The medieval love potion was, at its heart, an act of faith. Faith that something as uncontrollable as love could still be understood, influenced, or earned. It was humanity's way of saying, I refuse to accept randomness. Even when the church called it sin, even when science called it nonsense, people still wanted to believe in the possibility of magic between two souls. That, perhaps, is the real inheritance. And what a strange inheritance it is. The modern world is supposedly rational, yet our culture still drips with enchanted thinking. We still speak of chemistry and spark and magic in love. We still turn to rituals, first-date outfits, lucky charms, perfectly timed texts, as if they were spells. We still light candles for closure, manifest our exes in moonlight, and blame the stars when things go wrong. The medieval lover and the modern romantic would recognise each other instantly, both convinced that, with the right ingredients, destiny can be persuaded. If anything, the love potion story proves how little we've changed. We still fear rejection, crave affection, and yearn for control in a realm that refuses to be controlled. Whether we stir a cauldron or swipe on an app, we're all trying to summon connection in a world that rarely cooperates. The tools have evolved, but the impulse to make someone see us, want us, stay with us, remains stubbornly medieval. Perhaps that's why the myth endures. It flatters us. It tells us we can hack the heart, negotiate with fate, and turn longing into certainty. It gives shape to the most unshapable part of being human, desire. And even though we laugh at our ancestors for believing in magical brews, their hope is ours too. That somewhere between chemistry and chaos, love might just obey a recipe. The good news, we've learned enough not to drink from mysterious bottles. The bad news, we're still looking for them. We just call them solutions.